I built a new life from the ruins, brick by brick, loaf by loaf. But just when I thought I could bury the past, they pulled me back in. Gwen and her daughter, innocent souls caught in the crossfire of my second chance. I became their protector, their provider. But was it enough to erase the scars of betrayal? When the opportunity to change everything came knocking, I knew it was more than just a deal. It was redemption, wrapped in dough, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. When the bell rang, the other kids turned in their papers. He noticed they had done well. Dwayne and Roberto were still working, but they weren't helping each other. They gave their papers to Gerald. He told them to take their work home, finish it, and bring it back the next day. Gerald put the papers in his bag and checked out. On Wednesday, when the third graders came in, he gave them a similar paper to work on before starting lessons again. He wanted to see how Susie would do. When he looked at her paper, he saw that almost all the answers were incorrect. He explained a new lesson and handed out their worksheets. Then he asked the librarian to invite the principal and Gwen to the library. When they arrived, he showed them 2 papers. This is the paper Susie did yesterday. She got everything correct. I had her do the same problems this morning. Like you said, it seems like everything we did yesterday got mixed up overnight. They nodded in agreement. Gerald called out to Susie and asked her to bring her notebook. He gave her the same set of questions and said, "Susie, please read the steps you wrote down yesterday and then try these questions again." She looked over her notes from the day before and worked on the questions again. This time she got all but 1 correct. Gerald smiled and sent her back to join the other kids. Gwen asked, "What do you mean, Gerald?" "When I was in high school, there was a girl who had a similar experience. They tested her for learning issues but found nothing wrong. However, one teacher saw that if she took notes during lessons and used them for a little while, she really understood the material better. I think I remember hearing that our brains help us move information from short-term memory to long-term memory. In Susie's situation, I think the change is taking longer than expected. However, in a few weeks, things should become more normal if she can use notes to help her learn." Gwen looked at him surprised. The principal was deep in thought. Finally, he said, "We have tests coming soon, and she can't use notes during those, but we can let her use them until then. Do you think that will help?" "I'm not sure. I don't even know if this plan will work. It reminds me of another student from high school." "Did you have her take a practice test during the holidays?" "Yes, we did a practice test just before the Christmas break. She struggled with it, which is why she is here with you now. If you still have that test, see if she can do it again now. I think she might perform better this time. It's worth trying. I'll set it up for her to take it tomorrow morning. I'll set up a time for the district psychologist to visit and talk with her teachers. You may have discovered something important that was missed. By the way, what's going on with Jimmy Thompson?" Gwen answered. "He has always been a quiet boy and usually did well in school, but after Christmas his grades started to drop. He never said anything, but I worry there might be trouble at home. Many kids don't share what's happening in their lives, and that can affect their schoolwork." "Can your nurse check his eyes?" The principal agreed. "Have her look at his eyes. He seems to understand what we're doing and can read things from a distance. But then, he either brings the paper really close to his face or bends down to see it." "I think he is having trouble reading what's on the paper," Gwen replied. "He's in Miss Graves' class and she wants the students to sit up straight when they do their work." The principal called Jimmy out of the classroom and took him down the hall to the nurse. Gwen looked at Gerald and said, "If you're right, a lot of us might look a bit foolish." She smiled. "No, not at all. You all work with many kids each day, so it's hard to focus on one person unless there's a clear problem. I'm only looking at 6 kids, and I have a fresh perspective. It's easier for me to see things. Well, whatever the findings, you have definitely made a difference. Would you like to come to dinner at our place tonight? I think Sherilyn wants to cook for you. It will be a surprise night at the Lambert house." "Then I wouldn't want to miss that for anything. I'll be there." He handled the 4th grade the same way, but Dwayne called him over to their table. "Hey, man, I think I understand this, but why did you give us such a tough problem? Like I told you, it's the same as what the other kids have. You just have bigger numbers. But here's the bigger lesson. You hear about athletes getting huge contracts, but for every contract, there's an agent, a manager, and the tax collector waiting to take their share. So in this problem, you would only really get about half of what the contract says. Keep that in mind the next time you start counting your money when you turn pro. Roberto jumped in. Hey, I won't be paying any taxes with what I do. Well, if you don't get caught for what you do, you could still face consequences for not paying taxes. The most famous criminal in American history was Al Capone. He ran one of the biggest and most dangerous gangs in the country. He spent 20 years in prison for not paying his taxes. They could never find him guilty of anything else. Gerald paused for a moment, letting this information settle in. Then he continued. He was clever, but there were others who were even cleverer than him. That was another lesson neither of you seemed to notice. Dwayne, if you want to be a great athlete, you need to work as part of a team. Alone, you're just another person who can run quickly or throw a ball. The team is what helps you stand out. Roberto, everything about you shows that you can also be a part of a team even if you don't realize it. On your own, you're just another tough kid. But in a group, you might succeed at what you do. Either way, both of you need to learn how to get along and cooperate with others, or you won't achieve your goals. I paired you two up to see if you could work together. You chose not to. You both had a hard time alone, but if you worked together, things would have been easier and quicker. Let's go back to the table and wrap up the day. That evening, he saw Sherilyn in an apron busy with chores. Gwen stood nearby, observing everything closely. Sherilyn came over and offered a warm greeting. Gwen smiled and joined them. "You did a great job today," she said. "The nurse checked Jimmy's eyes and found a minor issue that needs attention. They sent him to an eye doctor who works with the schools to help him with that." His mother explained that they had an unfortunate car accident over the holidays, and she didn't have a way to take him for a checkup. Miss Graves was really shocked when she learned all of this. Jimmy hadn't talked about the crash or how he couldn't see. "I feel bad for Jimmy, but I'm glad it was noticed before it caused more trouble. Also, Susie's teacher is willing to try the notebook with her and see how she does. She will keep a closer eye on her work and find out when things are settled." "That's great news. Susie is a nice girl and probably didn't realize what was happening," Sherilyn happily announced. "Dinner is ready." She prepared their plates with a grilled sandwich filled with cheese, deli meat, and vegetables. On the side, she added a scoop of flavored rice with beans on top. Each plate also had a small salad. Gerald enjoyed the grilled sandwich because he had never tried it before. The beans and rice were a nice change from plain beans. The taste of the rice with the beans was really good. He had 2 servings of the rice and beans. Sherilyn told him they were starting geometry and that she and Jenny had some questions. She asked if they could come over on Thursday for help. Gerald smiled and said, "Of course, bring your books." Gwen had a PTA meeting, so Gerald offered to make dinner for the girls. Sherilyn replied, "Homemade pizza." Gerald smiled because he was expecting that answer. When the girls arrived after school, they took some time to relax before Gerald gently brought up geometry. He suggested they go to the garden to pick some lettuce. "How long do you think this row is?" he asked. Jenny answered, "I guess it's about 20 feet long." Gerald nodded. "That's a good guess. But how can you be sure?" Sherilyn said, "Well, if you had a tape measure, you could measure it." "Good idea. Is there another way?" Jenny replied, "We planted the lettuce seeds 1 foot apart. We could count the lettuce plants, and that would tell us how long the row is." "That's a really good idea, too. Anything else?" The girls didn't have another answer. Gerald said, "There are many ways to measure things, and that is what geometry is all about. The part metri means to measure, and geo means the earth. So geometry means to measure the earth. Sometimes measuring things like this row is easy because you can take a tape measure and check it. But other times it's much harder. Look at that tree over there. How tall do you think it is?" The girls looked puzzled. With geometry, you can find the height of the tree without using a tape measure. You can figure out a lot of things with it. I always like geometry because it lets you do many different things. Let's go inside and see where you all are starting. After this introduction and 30 minutes of drawing and talking, both girls understood the lesson and finished their homework quickly. They kept asking Gerald to let them make the pizzas. It didn't take much for him to agree. While he watched, an idea popped into his head. "Jenny, how many spoons of sauce do you think we need for each pizza?" She gave him a puzzled look. He went on, Sherry, how many slices of cheese should we use to cover the pizza? She looked just as confused. It was clear they didn't really know. They both paused and waited for him to say something. Instead, he stood up, grabbed a knife, and drew 3 lines on each pizza crust, making sections. Jenny, get a spoon and put sauce in one of these sections. Sherry, you do the same with cheese. They followed his instructions. Jenny, how many spoons of sauce did you use for one section? 3? Sherry, how many slices of cheese did you use? About 4.5. I had to break one to make the curve. So, how many spoons of sauce and pieces of cheese do you need to make one pizza? The girls smiled at each other. Jenny said, 18. Sherilyn added, 27. If you owned a pizza shop and had to make 50 pizzas tonight, you would know just how much sauce and cheese to prepare, right? Yes, they agreed. This is a useful way to learn geometry. You might not study this until high school, but it's called surface area. If you know how much space you need to cover with sauce, cheese, paint, fabric, or anything, and you know how much each item covers, you can easily find out how much to buy. Every business uses this every day, and most people don't even notice they are using geometry. From that day on, Gerald took every chance to ask them about different parts of geometry. The girls decided to ask Gerald about shapes and how things are used in hopes of catching him off guard. When they finally got to their geometry class in high school, he noticed how easily the 2 close friends understood the material, while the other students had a hard time grasping the ideas. That Friday night, Gerald went to Gwen's house for dinner. Sherilyn asked a simple question that led to a big talk. Sherilyn said, Gerald, how did you become so smart? Gerald looked down for a moment. Gwen jumped in quickly, saying, Sweetheart, maybe that's not the best question. It could make him feel uncomfortable. It's okay, Gwen. I'm not shy about answering her if she wants to know, Gerald replied. I just hope she can understand it. Gwen smiled and nodded at him. Sherry, I guess I did well in school when I was your age and in high school. I wasn't the best in every subject. I always knew there were people who were better than me, but I still did all right. Everything changed when I got to college. At first, I picked one subject to study, but after a couple of years, I lost interest and decided to choose something else that I liked more. By the time I finished, I had studied 4 different subjects. I found out that I enjoyed many topics, but I wasn't really drawn to just one enough to focus on it fully. I realized I was what people call a generalist. I love learning about a lot of different things. Sherilyn asked, What's a major? Gwen answered, In college, you have to choose a main subject to study more deeply. That's your major. You usually also pick a minor, which is another subject you're interested in. Oh, Gerald added, these subjects often help you with your future job. For example, a doctor typically majors in biology and minors in chemistry. Your mom probably studied education and then taught a few other subjects. Actually, I focused on elementary education. I wanted to be a science teacher at first, but in college I discovered I really enjoyed teaching reading, so I became a reading specialist. Gerald added, She didn't actually change majors, she just focused on a different area. I, on the other hand, switched my major completely. I moved from engineering to history, then to political science, and finally graduated with a major in English and a minor in history. Wow, that's impressive. Honestly, I learned like you are now. I took different classes, some I liked more than others. As I grew older, I realized I enjoyed bits of everything, but didn't want to spend all my time on just one subject. I bet it's easy for you to find a job, right? Sherry asked. Not really. Once people liked to hire workers like me who had a wide range of skills and could learn about many parts of a business, but now they prefer to hire people who focus on just 1 or 2 areas. Workers like me aren't as in demand in business anymore, but you are talented at many things. Thank you, dear. There are still some people out there who have many skills, but anyway, I'm content with my job and what I do. That is what matters most to me, and it should matter to you too. When you go to college, you might choose to study one main subject. Maybe that will stick with you, or you might discover another class that really interests you. When you find that subject, that's what you should pursue. There are so many subjects and career paths out there, many of which you might not know about yet. One of them could be the perfect fit for you. Start by exploring what you enjoy, but stay aware. Something might surprise you and capture your attention, making you say, "Wow!" When that happens, You found what brings you joy. Gwen listened as Gerald explained some things to Sherilyn that she had been trying to convey for months. It also revealed a lot about Gerald's perspective, helping her understand him better. After dinner, Sherilyn went to finish her homework while Gwen and Gerald took their coffee to the porch and sat down. "Thank you, Gerald. I've been trying to talk to her about a lot of these things, but wasn't sure if it made any sense to her," Gwen said. Gerald smiled and replied, "I had a lucky moment. Teachers call that a teaching moment. When important topics arise, it's important to share everything you can. 3 days from now, what we're discussing won't matter anymore. You really are clever, aren't you?" People have called me smart all my life, but it didn't mean much to me. I was always around people who seemed to be more knowledgeable or learned things faster. My endless curiosity about the world shaped who I am. I still don't know how smart I am, I just know a lot of things. What is important to one person might not matter to someone else. I stopped comparing myself to others. I just do my best and accept whatever happens next. Well, I think you're very smart, and I look up to you for that. She paused for a moment and then said, "I've decided to visit the prison again to talk to him one more time. If he hasn't changed his mind, I will likely file for divorce this summer. I don't want to deal with this at school. Gwen, you've been very patient, and I understand you've thought a lot about this. If it's the right time, you will feel it. Just know that I'm here for you." "I know. I wasn't asking for your okay. I just wanted to tell you what I decided. After I visit the prison, I will speak to Sherry. I'm not sure how she'll react. I think she might be confused, but we can find a way to work through it." "Thanks. That's what I needed to hear." Jenny and I had a chat, and she thinks that by the time Dad gets out, she will be older, and maybe they still won't be happy together. I think she should try to find happiness now. When Dad gets out, we can still meet if he wants to see me. He asked Mom not to bring me to see him anymore because he doesn't want me to see the prison he's in. What do you think about that? I understand what you're saying, but I also think your mom is trying to make the best choice for both of you. Her decision isn't just about herself. If I were in your shoes, I would talk to her and share how you feel. Just understand that this will be a change for both of you, and you'll both need to adapt. I know. You will still support us, right? Of course I will. I already knew that, but I wanted to hear you say it. They tidied up a few things and then got ready for dinner. They chose roast chicken with rice, vegetables, and some sesame rolls that Gerald had dough for in the freezer. They planned to eat at 7 o'clock because Gwen said she would be back around 6 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, Gerald lit the grill, and just as the fire was warming up, Gwen pulled in. He could tell something might be wrong. When she got out of the car, he walked over and softly asked, "Do you want to talk?" She softly replied, "Not right now. Maybe later." They went inside, and Sherilyn greeted her with a hug and a glass of tea. She prepared tea for both Gwen and Gerald, and they all sat together in the living room. After a few minutes of casual chatting, Sherilyn spoke up. "So, Mom, are you and Dad going to split up?" Gwen's face showed surprise as she glanced at Gerald. "Gerald didn't say anything. I talked to him and he said I should ask you. I know you've been thinking about this, so what did Dad say?" Gwen felt a bit of relief, like a heavy weight had been lifted. "He was pretty straightforward. He told me to just end it and that I shouldn't visit him anymore. He said he would think about seeing you again after he gets out, if he gets out. He's in more trouble now and has lost most of his good behavior time." Sherilyn felt a tear in her eye, but her voice stayed steady. "I kind of saw that coming. I told Gerald, and I'll tell you now, I think this is for the best. I have you and Gerald, and I am content. When he gets out, I'll be grown, and I will choose what to do then. I think we should meet and talk, but until then I have too much to do, so I believe you should just do what he wants. I know it will make you happier, and that will make me happy too." Gwen asked, "When did you grow up so much?" "Gerald says we're always growing and learning new things. Some things might not be what we want, but they help us grow and get what we need." She paused and then added, "Gerald, isn't it time to start cooking the chicken?" Gerald smiled and went outside to put the chicken on the grill. When he came back inside, Sherilyn was sitting with her mother and they were hugging. Gerald went to the kitchen to set the table and check on the rolls and vegetables. Then he went back outside to turn the chicken. When he came back inside, Sherilyn ran up to him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and gave him a warm hug. She softly said to him, I love you, Daddy. When he stood up, he had a tear in his eye. He was pleasantly surprised when Gwen hugged him and said, I'm not sure what happened, but this has been wonderful. Thank you for being yourself. This happy moment almost made the rolls and chicken burn, but they quickly saved the meal before it was ruined. Gerald opened a bottle of white grape juice and filled 2 glasses. Sherilyn asked if she could taste some. After Gwen nodded, he poured her half a glass. She took a sip and smiled. It tastes like apples, she said. After dinner, Gwen spoke again. On the way back, I made another choice. I want to do this after school ends, but I don't want to teach summer school while I'm busy with wrestling. So, Gerald, can I help you and Sherry with gardening, baking, and the market this summer? Why are you even asking? Of course you can, he replied with enthusiasm. I'm sure Sherry is getting tired of working with me, Gwen said. I'm not tired at all. I enjoy being with you, Mom. Why don't you come to the market with us tomorrow? It will be fun, Sherilyn said eagerly. I don't know what I should do there, Gwen admitted. You just stand and talk to people. If they ask you something you don't know, you can ask Gerald. Well, if that's okay with you, Gerald, she asked. We'll leave at 8, so don't be late or else you'll miss the train, he said with a smile. Sherilyn laughed and added, Mom, this summer you could make your pralines and sell them. No one there is selling them. Gerald pretended to be shocked and said, Gwen Lambert, we've been friends for 4 years and this is the first time I hear you make pralines. I can't believe it. If I had known, I would have asked you to make some for breakfast. Then he smiled widely. Sherilyn giggled and Gwen looked a bit shy. I've made them for special events, but I never thought about selling them, she admitted. I follow a recipe my grandmother shared with me and they taste great. But pecans are really pricey right now. I'm not sure what to do. Sherry, this is what they mean when they say adults aren't making decisions. They want to do something but are scared to go for it. They just come up with all sorts of reasons to avoid it, not taking action. All right, very clever, she said, a bit annoyed. I'll make a batch when we get home tomorrow, and you can be the judge if I should keep making them. Gwen felt shy, but she was also happy they were encouraging her to try. She honestly thought her cookies were better than the ones from the store. Plus, I happen to know someone with 3 big pecan trees. They grow local pecans that are smaller than what stores sell. He can't sell them and would love to give them away. But I promise you, I think they taste better than the store-bought ones. He went to his cabinet and brought out a bag full of nuts, handing it to her. Sherilyn laughed and said, Now you have no excuse, right, Mom? Gwen smiled back. Okay, clever girl, then you can crack and shell them. The 3 of them shared a laugh. Sherilyn asked, Gerald, do you have a nutcracker? Gerald stood up and handed one to her. She got busy cracking open pecans while Gerald and Gwen went out to the porch with their coffee. Gerald, I'm not sure about selling pralines. I mean, how much should I charge and how many should I make? I just have no idea. Gwen, when I first took my bread to the market, I was nervous and had never done anything like that before, but it turned out fine. If you don't try, you'll never know if it could work out. If you do give it a shot, you'll find out if people like it or not. You will know what to do, either make more or stop trying. Tomorrow, you can prepare a batch and keep track of how long it takes from start to finish and how much you spend on ingredients. I will sit down with you to show you the costs, and then we can set a price. Just try it once or twice. You really have nothing to lose. Okay, if you will help me. You are a teacher, and you always tell your students to do their best and that they will learn. You promise them that. I am promising you that if you try, something good will come from it. Tomorrow at the market, just take some time to walk around and see what other people are selling. Notice their prices and how much they sell. Some people do very well while others do not. Keep an open mind about what works and what doesn't. You will learn something, I promise. Gerald, you are the most encouraging person I have ever met. I will give it a try. Thanks for your help. I'm done, Sherilyn's voice called from the door. Did you get rid of the shells after 30 minutes with the sack? No, Gerald, I didn't. I know you want to put them in the compost bin. That's all right. He looked at Gwen and said, I like to recycle things when I can. The next morning, they set the table for breakfast and got ready for the day. Gwen walked off, just like Gerald had suggested, to check out the different booths. She saw people selling all kinds of things from fruits and vegetables to soap, cookies, and cakes. Some booths had a lot of people, while others had only a few. As the morning went on, she noticed many people carrying bags full of different things. She was surprised that the lady selling soap was doing really well. There was one woman selling fudge, and she seemed to have a lot of customers. The booths with jewelry and handmade items had many people looking, but not many buying. She saw all of this, but wasn't sure what it meant. Finally, she returned to Gerald's table. He was selling his last loaf of bread and only had 2 jars of beans left. Then she heard Sherilyn say, "Here she comes." She noticed an elderly woman with a cane and a shopping cart walking slowly up to him. "Hi, Maxine. How are you today?" Gerald asked. "I'm doing pretty well, Gerald. Thanks for asking. Do you have anything left for me?" The woman replied. "I do. I have 2 jars of beans and some buns. Nobody wanted them today. You can have them for $3. "That sounds great. Thank you, Gerald. We really enjoy your food. It helps us a lot to get your leftovers. Maxine, you know I will always look out for you." "I know, Gerald. It's so tough to get by, but people like you make it easier for us." "Go down and see George. I think he has some lettuce and carrots today that nobody wants." The old woman gave him 3 wrinkled dollars and thanked him again before walking down to a stand at the end of the aisle. Gerald and Sherilyn were taking apart the table and loading it into Gerald's truck when Gwen walked over. Gerald asked, "Are you ready for lunch? Sherry wants Mexican food. What do you think?" "That girl is going to eat too many tacos. Mexican sounds good. How did it go today?" "I sold everything. I could have sold 5 more loaves of bread if I had them. I promised some people that I would save special items for them next week." "But I heard you tell that last woman, Maxine, that the buns you sold her were what no one wanted." Sherilyn replied, "Mom, Gerald makes bread just for her and keeps it aside until she comes. He always tells her that no one wanted it today. He does the same with the jars of beans. He could give it to her, but she always wants to pay. George has some carrots and lettuce saved for her, too. Many people here do that." Before Gwen could reply, Gerald shrugged and said, "That's one of the things that makes this place nice. I bake and sell about 20 loaves of bread each week, but I bring 25. There are many older folks and those with little money who can't buy anything here. Some of us just try to make sure they get something to help. Maxine is one of those people." I noticed some vendors didn't sell much. Those vendors usually try to sell everything at full price. Most of the regular buyers know who helps others and who doesn't. They prefer to buy from those who are supportive. The others rely on new visitors. They do okay, or they wouldn't come back. It's kind of like how the regulars look out for each other and we look out for those who need it. No one talks about it, but everyone seems to understand. Everyone makes their own choices about what they do. So, if I sold pralines, I could give some away or lower the price for special people. That is up to you, Gwen. Mom, when Maxine first started visiting, Gerald would give me a pen and tell me to mark the label. That way he could say that a kid messed up a jar of beans or a loaf of bread. Now he just tells her that he didn't sell everything. I think she knows, but she lets Gerald go on with his story and she does her part too. It's kind of sweet, really. So you really sell things, but you also share some to help others. I guess that's one way to look at it. I don't think about it much. I just do it because it feels right. You are just like Gerald. Sherilyn laughed as they parked at the Mexican restaurant. Before they ordered, Gwen said, "I'm glad you told me to look around and see what was happening. I enjoyed that. I still have many questions, but now I want to see how the candies will be liked." "Good choice," Gerald replied simply. After lunch, they went to the store and Gwen bought what she needed to make the candies. Gerald drove the 2 girls home and then went back to his place to take a nap. He was woken up by Sherilyn jumping on his bed. "Wake up. Mom has a surprise for you." "If you jump one more time, I might surprise you right back." From the living room, they heard, "Sherry, leave him be. He'll get up when he wants to." "He's ready, Mom. He just doesn't know it yet." "I'll figure you out, you little rascal." He tried to grab her, but she ran into the living room laughing. Gerald crawled out of bed and grumbled all the way to the living room. He looked at Gwen and said, "Have you ever thought about giving her back to the Indians?" "Yes, I've thought about it, but they wanted too much to take her. Just wake up slowly and I'll keep her busy." "What time is it?" "Almost 5 o'clock. Wow, I slept too long." Gerald walked to the sink and drank some water. All right, I think I'm awake now. What's going on? Sherilyn shouted. Mom has a praline for you to try. That's a great reason to wake me up. Sherry, don't make him feel pressured like that, Gwen told her daughter. Gerald jumped in. No, she's right. I asked for a praline. It's time to taste it. Where is it? Gwen carefully held out a plate full of pralines. He took one, bit off a piece, and enjoyed the flavor. Then he finished the rest. Sherry could hardly wait. So, what do you think? Gerald answered with his eyes still closed. No, we won't sell them. I want them all for myself. He opened his eyes and smiled at Gwen. Those are amazing. We should take them to the market next week. Are you sure? I just made these and... I'm sure. Let's make 50 of them. If we have any leftovers, I will buy them and eat them myself. Gerald, are you joking with me? No, Gwen, they really are that good. Please, let's give it a shot. She smiled a little. Okay, if you say so. I will make them on Thursday night. You won't regret it. I'm making dinner, and it will be ready in 30 minutes. Will you be there? I never miss a chance to enjoy your cooking, but take your little helper with you. I need some time to myself first. Come on, little helper. Let's leave him alone for a bit. Sherilyn followed her mother, grinning widely. On Sunday, they sat down with her recipe and figured out the cost of each ingredient. Gerald also added in the estimated work for each batch. When they finished, Gwen was surprised that for a batch of 50, the cost was just over $1 each. Gerald suggested that she sell them for $3 each or two for $5. At first, she thought that was a bit too much, but Gerald said it was a good starting point. He told her that if people found it too high, she could change the price later. She decided to trust his advice. On Thursday, she and Sherilyn made the candy. On Friday, they put it in plastic bags with labels that Gerald made and tied ribbons around them to make them look nicer. She had some broken pieces, which she offered to Gerald. He asked her to break them into smaller bits and take them to the market so people could taste them. On Saturday, she stood nervously behind the table with Gerald and Sherilyn, waiting for their first customer. The first person to arrive was one of her teachers from school. Hi, Gwen, Sherilyn. I haven't seen you here before. Hi, Linda. This is my first day. So what do you have? Oh, pralines. I love pralines. Here, try a piece and see if you like it. It's my grandmother's recipe. Oh, wow, this is amazing. How much are they? She took a deep breath and replied, They're $3 each or two for $5. Without hesitation, her coworker said, I'll take 4, and handed her a $10 bill. You're going to do great with these, girl. Take care, and I'll see you on Monday. Gwen's hand trembled a little as she put the money into the big envelope that Gerald had given her. When she looked up, she saw Gerald and Sherilyn smiling at her. Sherilyn hugged her mom, and Gerald shook her hand, praising her on her first sale. It was not the only sale she would make. By the time Gerald sold his last loaf of bread, she had already sold her last bag of candy. She was amazed at how much people loved her pralines. Then she heard Sherilyn say, Here she comes. Gerald took a loaf of bread and a large jar of beans from the counter and placed them on the table. Good day to you, Maxine. Hello, Gerald. Hello, Sherilyn. How did the market go today? It went really well. We nearly sold everything, but I still have a few items left for you. Thank you, Gerald. I can't tell you how much I value all that you do for us. Today, I have something special for you. This is Sherilyn's mom. Her name is Gwen, and she made some pralines to share with everyone. I think she has just one left. Gwen looked a bit shy until she spotted the praline sitting next to Sherilyn. Gwen smiled and offered the bag to Maxine. It's nice to meet you, Maxine. Sherilyn talks about you a lot. Please try my praline and let me know if you like it. She extended the treat towards her. Maxine hesitated. I would love to try it, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to be careful with my sugar intake. Gerald took the candy, broke it in half, and then split each half into smaller pieces. There you go. Now you can each have a little bite. There's not a lot of sugar in a small piece. That way, both of you can enjoy a piece every other day. Maxine smiled and replied, That sounds good. Now, if I can just keep my husband from taking the other pieces. She took the candy from Gwen and put it in her basket. Gwen suggested, Put it in a bowl on a shelf with your dishes instead of the pantry. That's how I keep them away from Sherilyn. They never check the dish cabinet. Maxine had a playful smile. That's a clever idea. He knows all my hiding spots in the pantry, but never looks in the dish cabinet. Great! And please tell me how you like it. I will. Oh, and Maxine, I think Donna said she has a lot of potatoes and green beans today. I don't think she expected to sell them all, Gerald added. Thanks, everyone. I better continue with my shopping. It's nice to meet you, Gwen, she said as she walked happily down the path toward Donna's stand. Once she was far enough away, Gwen said, I meant to save a couple of bags like you told me, but I forgot. Where did that one come from? Gerald replied with a serious look. Your daughter has become quite the clever one. Sherilyn smiled up at her mother. Gwen wrapped her arms around her and gave her a warm hug. When they finished packing up, Gerald said, Let's go for a Chinese buffet for lunch. Sherilyn made a face but didn't say anything. Gwen felt happy because she hadn't had Chinese food in a long time. She looked Gerald right in the eye and said, Only if I get to pay for it. Deal, he agreed. In the truck, Sherilyn stayed quiet. Gwen asked, Why are you so quiet, honey? Don't you like Chinese food? It's too hot and spicy, Sherilyn replied. Gwen turned to Gerald for an answer. We've only gone a few times, so she hasn't found anything she enjoys yet, Gerald explained. Today, little one, I want you to try the orange or sesame chicken, and let's skip the mustard or sauce. I think you might like it more. I'll try, Gerald, but if I don't like it, I don't want to come back, okay? That's fine. You can taste the chicken today, and if you don't enjoy it, we won't come again. When they arrived, Gerald took her to the trays with the 2 chicken dishes. They are like chicken nuggets with sauce. Try a little of each and see how you feel. She took a scoop of each chicken dish and added rice and some veggies to her plate. Gerald added a few scoops of sesame chicken, shrimp, and vegetables to his plate. Gwen was happy and filled her plate with a variety of food on her rice. When they sat down, Sherilyn nervously picked up a piece of chicken and took a bite. Her eyes lit up right away and she said, Hey, this is good and it isn't too hot. Both Gwen and Gerald nodded and smiled, their mouths too full to talk. Sherilyn went back for more chicken 2 more times. When they got home, Gwen and Gerald sat down to count their money from the day. Gerald made just over $200 from his bread and beans. Gwen was excited to see she made $130 from her pralines. Gerald, I was thinking about what Maxine said. Next week, I think I will make the big ones, but also some smaller ones to put 6 or 8 in a bag. A lot of parents might like the smaller pieces for their kids. Plus, older people probably don't need a lot of sugar. What do you think? She looked at him and saw only smiles, which made her smile even more. Gwen, I think you really understood the market idea. I suggest making 50 big ones and starting with 25 bags of small pieces. I think you just got more customers. I was also thinking of giving them a name like you do. How about Gerald's favorite treat? Gerald frowned. What about Grandma's best? Gwen smiled at his shyness. I'll think about it. The next Saturday, Gwen launched Grandma's Best Pralines and Grandma's Praline Bits. She sold all of them. This time, she made 10 extra bags of bits for samples and saved some for special people. When they counted the money later, she was surprised to see she made $25 more than the week before, even with the extra small bags. When she asked Gerald about it, he said, What did most people buy the first week? Most people bought 2 pralines. Exactly, so you didn't really sell them for $3 each, you sold them for $2.50 each. This week you sold 1 big one for $3 and 1 small one for $2.50. So you actually sold most of your bags for $2.75 each. It might be different each week, but that should be the general idea. Don't worry too much about it. Just make the candy you think you can sell that week and be pleased with what you achieve. I'm really happy with how things have turned out. I'm just trying to understand why things happen the way they do. Start a chart and write down each week how many big bags and small bags you sold, along with the total money you made. Keep track of the average price for each bag, and that will help you see how you are doing. I think your average price should be about $2.75, but try it out and see what happens. Should I make more for next week? You sold 50 big bags. Could you have sold more? No, I don't think so. I probably could have sold more small bags. Then stick with 50 big bags and add 10 or 15 small ones. Ideally, you want to sell your last bag during the last hour so that you have nothing left to take home. That doesn't happen very often, but that's what you should aim for. If you think you can sell more, add a few extra, but not too many. If sales are low or if the weather looks bad, sell a little less. You will start to understand how things work as time goes by. That sounds good. I'll add 10 more items next week. Gwen was very excited, especially as spring went on. She was making about $150 each week, and after covering her costs, she was able to add around $400 to her income every month. She decided to save half of her earnings, and for the first time in a long while, she felt less stressed about paying her bills each month. At the end of May, Gwen called Gerald from school and asked him to come over for dinner that night, but she didn't explain why. He didn't think much of it, so he agreed. Gwen and Sherilyn prepared a delicious meal, which they all enjoyed together. After dinner, Jim took Sherilyn and Jenny to the movies, which was a special treat for Sherilyn. When they got back, Gwen poured Gerald a glass of juice and said, "Tonight is a celebration, but I couldn't tell you until after Sherry left." "What are we celebrating?" Gerald asked. "We received the test scores back. Almost all the students you helped passed, and Dwayne and Roberto got really good scores in math." Gerald smiled and replied, "I'm surprised Roberto passed. I didn't think he understood what we talked about. We may never know the full story. His brother got caught in a raid and their family moved away the following week. I heard they went back across the border, but I can't say for sure. I hope he learned something from it." "Who didn't pass?" Gerald inquired. "Susie missed passing by just 1 point," Gwen answered. "The good news is that your way of teaching was helping in class, but she was too far behind to catch up completely. Still, this is the best score she has ever gotten on the state tests. The psychologist checked her again and found that she has a learning disability. Now, she can take the tests with some support. She will take the test again next week, and her teacher believes she will pass it this time. That's wonderful news. I'm proud of her." "Gerald, we are celebrating what you did for these kids. They all needed help to do better. It was your hard work and patience that made a big difference. The principal wants to know if you can come in 2 mornings a week next year to help the kids earlier." "Please tell the principal that I would be happy to come in. I really liked working with the kids. I told you that you should think about being a teacher. With all the things you say I have to do, I could probably be okay in the classroom, but they would let me go because I wouldn't handle everything else well. If that's true, they would let all of us go." During the rest of the summer, the 3 of them, often joined by Jennifer, worked in the gardens, made bread and candy, and went to the market every Saturday. The day after school ended, Gwen met with a lawyer. Because of what was happening, he said the divorce would be easy, not cost too much, and would be finished quickly. He thought it would be done by early August, well before school started. This news made Gwen feel a lot better. Jim and Pam would be busy most of the summer, so a vacation didn't seem likely for the Sanders family. In late June, Gerald told Gwen that he knew someone who was renting out an RV. He asked if she would like to take the girls to the coast for a week. The RV had 2 bedrooms, and the sofa turned into a bed. It had a nice kitchen, and they could make the trip without spending much money. It didn't take Gwen long to say yes, and they decided to go the week before school started. The girls were excited, and Jim and Pam were on board with the plan. The week went by too quickly for the girls, but they returned home tired while Gerald and Gwen felt very refreshed. This was the first vacation for either of them in over 5 years. The next year went by fast and was quite normal compared to the ones before. Gerald helped the girls with their algebra studies. As always, he made it easy for them to understand, and they did very well throughout the year. The most important event happened in early summer when a company reached out to Gerald about buying the recipe and rights to his lawman beans. Gerald suggested a similar deal as the one he had with bread. Once everything was settled, he would earn money for 7 years but accepted a single payment for the name. He could still sell beans at the market, but they asked him to change the name he used. He agreed, so his lawman beans became Gerald's beans. He rented the RV again, and this time they drove west. The girls enjoyed seeing mountains, deserts, and the Old West. In total, they traveled for 8 days through 7 states, adding more entries to their travel journal that they had kept since their trip to the East Coast with Jim and Pam. For Christmas, Sherilyn and Gwen gave Gerald a small television. He thanked them a lot, but realized he rarely used the TV except for some weather updates, news, and baseball games during the summer. He bought them a new washer and dryer because their old washer was breaking, and Gwen had never owned a dryer. She was very happy that she didn't have to hang their clothes outside anymore, especially in winter. They welcomed the new year with smiles, along with Jim, Pam, and Jennifer. Everyone felt fortunate that their lives were going so well. Years 6, 7, and 8, the next 3 years went by quickly for Gwen and Gerald, with few problems or big events. But it was a significant change for the girls as they moved up from elementary and middle school to junior high and high school. In 8th grade, they could join school sports, so both girls became part of the volleyball and softball teams. Jennifer had grown a lot and was almost 5'7", while Sherilyn stayed at 5'4" inches for another year. After getting used to her new height, Jennifer became a leader on the volleyball team. Sherilyn was the digger, often diving to the floor to save the ball or catch a bad pass. As the year went on, Sherilyn's smaller size helped her perform well in softball. Jennifer, who was taller and a bit leaner, excelled in defense and played first base, rarely missing a catch or a throw. Even though Jim had to skip some games for work, he, along with Pam, Gwen, and Gerald, attended nearly all of the girls' games in both sports. Afterward, they usually enjoyed pizza or burgers together. Throughout most of the school year, Sherilyn often had bruises on her legs from playing volleyball and softball so intensely. Meanwhile, Jennifer remained tall and a little awkward all year. Both girls always found time to be with Gerald, who assisted them with their schoolwork. Gerald had a significant moment when he picked Sherilyn up for the Valentine's Day father-daughter dinner. When Gwen brought her out, he noticed that Sherilyn was no longer a little girl but a lovely young woman looking very much like her mother and wearing subtle makeup. Gerald was amazed by how much she had changed. "Hey, Gerald, aren't you going to say anything?" Sherilyn asked with a warm smile. I don't know what to say. Where did my little girl go? She has turned into a beautiful young woman." Sherilyn laughed, and Gwen looked proud, capturing pictures of them both alone and together. Gerald had made a corsage for Sherilyn again, and she created a new medallion for him in her art class. This one was nicer than the first, made of clay with a shiny finish. He cherished it a lot, but nothing could replace the first one she had given him. Now, he had 3 medallions displayed on his wall. His second surprise came when he met Jim and a tall, lovely young woman at school. All he could say was, "Jennifer?" "Hi, Gerald, what do you think? Do we look nice?" she asked. "The only way you wouldn't look good is if someone couldn't see. You both are simply beautiful. I don't have another way to say it." Jim chuckled and said, "Gerald, I know where to find a good shotgun at a low price." It took a moment for Gerald to understand, and then he replied, "I might just take you up on that." Dinner was the best meal they had enjoyed in 3 years. They danced for a few songs before the girls took over the dance floor. Gerald and Jim chatted while the girls danced. "Gerald, it has been 3 years since our trip up the East Coast. Pam and I have been talking about taking a week off this summer to go on a cruise or visit Cancun. Do you think Sherilyn would want to come, and do you think Gwen would let her? Wow, that's a big question. I bet Sherry would really want to go. I guess Gwen might worry about how much it would cost. Let's not mention it to her yet. Pam is gathering details, but it seems like the price difference between 3 and 4 people is not very much. We would need 2 cabins no matter what. We can drive to the coast and get on the ship there so there won't be an airplane ride. I think we can make it work for her budget. If it turns out that way, I'll help her, and I'm sure Sherry and I can convince Gwen." "That sounds good. I'll let you know before we bring it up with her." "Thanks." After he took Sherilyn home, he and Gwen sat on the porch with their coffee. "Gwen, I'm not sure I'm ready for Sherry to grow up. She looks so much like you." Gwen smiled. "Thanks. She is a lovely young girl, and she has matured a lot. But I have to say, you can't stop her from getting older. That's just how life is. Jim told me tonight that he knows where to find a good purchase for a low price." Gwen laughed. "I bet he already has something in mind. What did you think of Jenny all dressed up? Honestly, I almost didn't recognize her. I knew she had grown, but she looked so much more mature next to Jim. I think Sherry will grow a few more inches this year, too. I believe she might be about my height. There aren't many tall people in our families. Still, I'm not sure how to handle Sherry and Jenny now. Well, try this. They will go back and forth between acting like young girls and more grown-up young women. When they act like girls, treat them the same as before. When they want to act more mature, treat them like you treat other grown-ups. They will spend several years going back and forth, but they will start to present themselves more like young adults as time goes on. That's kind of what happened to me. It felt like I went from being silly to grown up all of a sudden when I turned 18. Yes, I remember the boys being like that too. The good thing is that while this is happening, the boys will still be playful. So maybe you won't need to worry too much. By the time the boys grow, the girls will be 18 too. I'm not really worried about the boys their age. I'm more concerned about the boys who are 18 when they are just 16. Okay, so maybe you should consider getting some protection when she turns 16. I might just do that. Sounds like a true dad. They both laughed and finished their coffee. Gerald took Gwen's advice and paid more attention to the girls' moods at different times. When they were by themselves, they acted like girls. But when they were at the market or around older people, they tried to seem like young women. He sometimes missed the hints, but not too often. He quickly learned how to change the way he spoke to them depending on what they wanted to convey. He also paid close attention as they learned to communicate and interact with adults. He felt happy and grateful that neither of them acted rudely or overly confidently like many teenagers did around grown-ups. Neither girl went through the usual who cares and you don't understand phases. They always participated in their classes, after-school activities, and while working with him at the market and at home. In his quiet moments, he hoped his own children would grow up just as well. The second surprise of the year came during their final softball game. Sherilyn hit a double and stood on second base. Jennifer was up to bat and hit a strong ground ball right up the middle. To everyone's surprise, the other team's shortstop caught the ball, turned, and threw it to the plate just as Sherilyn slid in to score. There was a cloud of dust and then a loud sound that everyone recognized as Sherilyn's distress. Both Gwen and Gerald stood still, shocked. The umpire helped the catcher up and kept the crowd back until the coach arrived. He quickly signaled for the trainer. By this time, Gwen and Gerald were near the dugout, and Jim had gone to get his van. The trainer wrapped Sherilyn's injured leg with a special bandage. Then, they carefully lifted her up. Gerald rushed over to assist and carried her while the trainer supported her leg. They all hurried to Jim's van, which was parked nearby, and drove promptly to the hospital just 5 minutes away. It wasn't until they took Sherilyn into the X-ray room that Gwen broke down and cried. Gerald held her tightly while she sobbed. He gave Jim the keys to his truck and said he would go back to the school to pick up Pam and Jenny. He promised to return with his truck later. They waited for a long time until the doctor finally came out to speak with them. Mrs. Lambert, I'm sorry it took a while to come talk to you, but Sherilyn has hurt her leg in an unusual way. The good news is that it will heal and shouldn't cause any long-term issues. She broke a bone in her leg just above her ankle, and she also hurt a tendon. It looks like it was a tough impact. We are going to put a cast on her leg to keep it steady. She will need to rest for a couple of days, but after that, she can walk on the cast and go back to school. The cast will stay on for about 6 to 8 weeks. After that, she will need to wear a brace for a few more months so that her bone can heal completely and the tendon can get better. If she takes care, she should be back to her normal activities by October. Thank you, Doctor. Can we see her now? Yes, she is down the hall in treatment room 2. They are putting her cast on right now. I gave her something for the pain, but she seems to be feeling okay. Here is a prescription for pain relief if she needs it. For the next week, taking aspirin or ibuprofen can help with any swelling. I have just one question. What is it, Doctor? Did she score? Gwen looked at Gerald and they both shrugged. They had never heard the call and right now it didn't matter much. Gerald planned to stay in the waiting room, but Gwen took his arm and led him down the hallway, saying that Sherry would probably want to see him more than her. They found the room, and even though Sherry looked a bit groggy from the pain medicine, she was talking to the technician about sliding into home plate. She couldn't remember how the ball got to the catcher and thought it had gone into the outfield. The technician, a baseball fan, told her that someone must have made a good play. Gwen and Gerald stayed by the door until Sherry noticed them. Mom, Dad, did I score? Did we win? Honey, we don't know right now. We were just worried about you. Maybe Jim will know more when he brings Gerald's car. Gerald, did I do well? No, honey, you did great. You hit the ball 3 times and scored once. Their shortstop did a fantastic job stopping Jenny's hit and then threw it to the catcher. But we still don't know what the decision was. Oh, okay. I'll ask at school tomorrow. Gwen chimed in. You won't be going to school until Monday. The doctor said so. Oh, no. Watching TV during the day is so dull. Gerald, can I stay with you? Of course, but I'm pretty boring during the day, too. Oh, don't make me laugh, please. It hurts to laugh. The technician finished the first layer of plaster and stood up. I'll let that sit for a few minutes and then put on another layer. I'll be right back. As he walked over to Gwen and Gerald, he said softly, That's one tough little girl you have. She hasn't cried or yelled since she got here. Gwen walked over and held her hand. Sherilyn asked, When we are done, can we go get pizza? I think we are going home first, and then you can rest. Maybe Gerald will make you a pizza if you want, Gwen replied. All right, Gerald. I want lots of pepperoni, olives, tomatoes, and onions. Oh, I'm not sure what else I want. Her head tilted to the side and her eyes closed. Then she added, And a lot of cheese. Gerald took her other hand and smiled as she squeezed his. The worker returned and added more layers of fabric and plaster, then smoothed it out. As a final touch, he signed his name in the wet plaster. I always like to leave my mark, he said with a smile. The doctor will be back soon to talk to you again. Before the doctor came back, Jim and Jennifer arrived. Jenny, still in her uniform, ran over to her friend and said, Cher, we won. Your score was the winning run. Sherilyn, still feeling sleepy, could only say, Good. I'm happy we won. Gwen told Jim what the doctor had said. He nodded and asked a few questions. They stayed a little longer until it was clear that Sherilyn would be resting for a while. They planned to meet the team at the pizza place and share the news about Sherilyn. The doctor came in and repeated what he had told them before. He believed the cast was sturdy enough for her to go home. Gerald drove his truck to the exit while they wheeled Sherilyn to the door. He helped Gwen into the truck and then settled Sherilyn next to her mom. He got in and placed her leg across his lap. They thanked the nurses and he drove them home. When they arrived, he gently carried her inside and to her bedroom. Gwen followed and started to help her change into comfortable clothes. Do you want me to get some pizza crusts? He asked. Yes, please get 3, but let's only bake 2 for now. She probably won't wake up, but we'll be ready if she does. Gerald drove to his house and grabbed some crusts from the freezer. He then picked out some fresh toppings and went back to Gwen's house. Just as he placed 2 pizzas in the oven, he heard Gwen call from the bedroom, Put the 3rd one in too, she's awake and hungry. Gerald smiled and quickly prepared the 3rd pizza just the way Sherilyn liked it. 20 minutes later, he sliced all 3 pizzas and took them to the bedroom. Sherilyn was sitting up in bed and Gwen was beside her. He handed a plate to Sherilyn and she said, Thank you, Gerald. Mom, eat your pizza. I'll be fine. Gerald sat down next to Gwen, and the 3 of them enjoyed dinner together. When Sherilyn finished, she said, I'm probably going to fall asleep now. Gerald, will you come and check on me in the morning? Yes, I will. I'll be here when your mom leaves in the morning. Just rest until you feel ready to get up. Okay, Gerald. Good night, Mom. I love you both, she said. She got comfortable in her bed, and Gwen and Gerald each wished her good night before turning off the light and heading to the kitchen to clean up. Gerald, I was really scared today. Thank you for being here for me and Cherie, she told him. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, he replied. You are really special. She gently rubbed his cheek, expressing her gratitude. Gerald said goodnight and went home. For the next 2 days, Gerald visited Gwen's house and picked Sherilyn up, carrying her to his truck. He drove her to his home. She settled down on his sofa with her leg up on a stool. In front of her was the television, and beside her was her laptop. She didn't ask for much, but Gerald felt like he needed to take care of her. By noon, she looked at him and said, Gerald, I'm okay. Please just bring me some dough to roll and then go do what you need to do. I'm not a kid anymore, Gerald simply replied. Yes, ma'am. She laughed at how awkward he was. Pam dropped Jenny off in the afternoon with her schoolwork. They laughed and did their homework together. Gerald came in at 5 o'clock and asked what they wanted for dinner. They both said, tacos. When Gwen walked in after her meeting, she felt happy. She could smell the taco meat and knew that Sherilyn was feeling better. By then, the two girls were laughing and playfully teasing Gerald. When Gerald saw Gwen, he said, "I'm glad you're here." Gwen smiled as the girls continued to giggle. "Just a reminder, Gerald, Jenny's dad is the sheriff. He will expect to pick her up later," Gwen said. "Oh, I forgot. The tacos are ready. Gwen, you take the chicken, and the girls can have the mystery meat," said Gerald. Mystery meat is my favorite," Sherilyn replied, causing more giggles. The girls sat on the sofa to eat, while Gwen and Gerald had their meal at the table. At 8 o'clock, Jim came to check on Sherilyn before taking Jenny home. With only 3 weeks left of school, Sherilyn got used to her cast and finished the year strong. Jenny had written on her cast in big letters, "The price of the winning run." Many kids in school added their signatures, too. It felt a bit strange, but Sherilyn still wanted to go to the market with Gwen and Gerald. Gerald found a stool for her so she could sit down and rest her leg when she got tired. In mid-June, Pam and Jim invited the three of them over for dinner. Jim had told Gerald earlier that day what they were going to discuss. Gerald was ready for it. Dinner was fun and cheerful. Pam, as always, shared lots of gossip and stories about what was happening in the area. Jim was in charge of cooking and made great baby back ribs. After they finished eating, they sat on the back porch enjoying some homemade ice cream. Jim started the conversation. "Pam, what does the doctor say about Sherry's recovery?" "He is happy with her progress. The x-rays from the other day show that her bone is healing well." "So he still thinks the cast will come off next month?" "Most likely, unless something changes. If it does, she'll have to wear a boot for a few months, but at least she can take it off. They want to avoid her putting too much pressure on it, but she will be able to get around." "Why?" Gwen sensed something was up. Pam continued, "Well, Gwen, we are thinking about a little getaway in early August, and we want Sherry to come with us again." "I smell something fishy. How little is this getaway?" "Actually, it's not very big or stressful at all. Pam, when you say little, it often turns out to be a lot bigger. Just tell me already." The girls laughed and the boys smiled. "Fine. If you want to know, we are planning a week-long trip to Cancun. It's not a big deal. We're not crossing the ocean or anything." Gwen just looked at Pam and then at Jim. Then Sherilyn jumped in. "Please, Mom, please. This will be so great, and I can't get into trouble just sitting on a boat and—" "And how long have you been planning this trip?" Gwen asked. Jim answered, "About a month." "Listen, Gwen, this makes sense. The cruise ship is nice, and Sherry is right. There are fun activities, but nothing too tiring. She and Jenny will probably spend a lot of time by the pool. When we get to Cancun, we can take a taxi into town and walk around to shop or visit the beach." "Jim Sanders, you are a lawyer and you know exactly what I mean. How much will it cost?" "That's the good part. We would be paying for 2 cabins anyway, so adding one more ticket won't be too much. We'll drive to the coast and catch the ship from there. It really isn't a big expense." She looked at Gerald. "Since Jim isn't saying much, use your charm and get him to talk about the cost." Gerald smiled. "All right, Sheriff. What's the rule for this situation?" Jim laughed. "Oh, you want to know what the fine is for speeding. Why didn't you just say it?" Pam rolled her eyes playfully, and the girls laughed, finding camaraderie in their shared experiences. Jim continued. "The trip, including meals, would be $1,000. Then she would just need some extra money." Gerald could see Pam thinking hard, knowing she wanted to make the most of this opportunity. He decided to step in. "Jim, that sounds like a really good deal and hard to pass up." "I think we can pay for the trip, and Sherry has saved a lot by helping me," he replied. "And how long have you been part of this plan, Mr. Murphy?" Her tone was serious, but her eyes sparkled as she looked at him. Just as I thought. All right, Jim. Since Mr. Murphy has everything figured out, and knowing him, I'm sure it's all very detailed. Sherry can go only if she keeps improving before then. I don't want to take any chances." "I understand, Gwen. The only thing is she needs to get a passport. Here's the application. We've already taken her picture, so all you need to do is sign it and send it off." "I feel a bit misled," Gerald replied. "Just a bit. You and I will have a discussion when we get home, mister. Sheriff, can I stay in the jail tonight?" "Nope, it's full." Go home and take your medicine like a responsible adult. That's what I'm worried about." When Gwen said yes, the girls cheered and rushed into Jenny's room to plan their trip. Sherilyn was still feeling happy when they got home. She went straight to her room, leaving Gerald to talk to Gwen. She made them some coffee before she started speaking. "Okay, how long have you known?" "Just tonight, really. Around the time of Sherry's accident, he mentioned that they were thinking about it, but nothing was set yet. He asked me to keep it quiet until they knew more. I thought if it happened, it would be good for her. If we both shared the cost, Sherry could have a wonderful vacation." Gwen's serious face softened. "Me too. Sorry for teasing you a bit. I really think it will be great for her. I will miss her while she is away and wish I could go on an adventure like that too. Well, I wanted to talk to you about something." She gave him a curious smile. "Please tell me it's not another surprise." "No, it's another chance. With you, that feels like the same thing. Come here and take a look." Gerald opened a website that showed beautiful mountains, clear streams, trees, and cozy buildings. "That looks amazing. Where is this?" "Central Washington." "Okay, what's the catch? I feel like there's more to this." Gerald smiled. "This is a village connected to a church. You can visit, stay there, and enjoy everything they have to offer. It's run by volunteers. I thought that while they are away, you might want to go there for a couple of weeks to volunteer and enjoy a change of scenery." Despite herself, Gwen felt excited. "What kind of volunteer work would I be doing, and how much does it cost?" Here is a list of volunteer opportunities. It includes everything from gardening, fixing things, doing laundry, and cleaning the house. Everyone takes turns working in the kitchen, but some people go there more often. Okay, let's talk about the cost. You know that's important. I understand. The cool part is that staying there for a week costs about $500, but if you help out, you don't have to pay anything. Your work acts like your payment, so the only cost is getting there. And what does that cost? Well, that's where the fun begins. From here, we would fly to Seattle, then take a train over the mountains, and finally take a boat to reach the place. It's very far away. There's no phone service, radio, or TV there. Please tell me the price. I'm interested, but I need all the details. Jim has a lot of travel points that could cover one ticket. If we share the cost of the other ticket, it would probably be about $500 each for the trip. So you're saying that Sherry and I could each enjoy a nice vacation, and it would cost us $1,000 each? I don't know how you get into these situations. Here's the deal. If you let me pay for Sherry's trip, you can handle the trip to this place. What else are you leaving out? That sounds good to me. The only thing I know is that their trip will last from Friday to the following Sunday. We would need to leave the Friday before that. We'll help out for 2 weeks. We'd return on the Sunday they come back. Gwen thought for a moment and then said, "I can ask Mom and Dad to come down and stay with Sherry until they go. They would love to spend time with her. That would fix that issue. So, do you want to go for it?" She paused for a second and said, "Yes, I need a break and this sounds like a great opportunity." Great. He opened his email and showed her the one that confirmed they were accepted as volunteers for the first 2 weeks of August. He got a job with the building and maintenance team and asked Gwen to pick her tasks. She could choose from gardening, cleaning, or taking care of children. "I knew you were trying to make me pick gardening," she said with a smile. He smiled back at her. "I want to do gardening. I clean the house all year and work with kids during the school year." Gerald clicked on his email and replied. After he hit send, she leaned over and lightly touched his cheek, saying softly, "You are sneaky, but a really good sneaky." By the 4th of July, everything was arranged. Everyone was excited for the month to go by, and it flew by quickly. Gwen had new questions for Gerald almost every day. He had to admit that since he had never been there before, he didn't have many clear answers. They decided to take things as they came and follow the advice that the retreat gave them. Finally, the Thursday before Gwen and Gerald were set to leave, Gwen's parents came to visit. Gerald was invited for dinner and met her parents for the first time. They got along right away, and the evening was fun and enjoyable. On Friday morning, Gerald picked up Gwen at 9 o'clock so they could drive to the airport for their flight. Gwen didn't start to feel relaxed until the plane took off. She leaned in and said to him, "Now I really believe this is happening. Gerald replied, "I know what you mean. I kept waiting for something to change, but it's too late now." 2 weeks later, on their flight home, they both thought about their trip. Gwen was amazed by the sights and the beauty of the state and the retreat. She had quickly gotten used to village life. She especially liked the evening dinners and the gatherings. Gwen loved visiting the craft shops during her free time. She and Gerald made pottery and learned how to weave fabric with a loom. In her suitcase, she had a table runner that she made herself. Gerald felt the same way. He enjoyed working on the old buildings and all the different projects he got to do. He also found peace during the quiet evening moments. Overall, they both felt tired but happy after their adventure. As they got closer to home, Gwen asked Gerald to stop at a small park by the road for a moment. When they parked, she took his hand and held it as she talked. "Gerald, these last 2 weeks have been some of the best moments of my life. Thank you for planning this trip for us. I really want to go back, but next time, I'd like to bring Sherry and maybe Jenny, too. Can we do that? We could start saving money now and—" "I was thinking the same thing, Gwen. Next summer, Jim will be running for re-election again, and I don't think they will be able to take time off. Let's talk to them, and if they agree, we can start planning right away." "Gerald, you are really special." In a moment of spontaneity, she expressed her appreciation with a gentle gesture that surprised them both. This made them feel nervous, but neither of them felt bad about it. They drove home quietly. When they arrived, they saw 2 brown girls and 2 tired adults. Instead of making dinner, they all decided to go out for Mexican food. Sherilyn said it best, "I like our tacos more than the ones in Mexico." While eating, the girls shared stories about their time on the cruise. Gerald noticed that much of their conversation revolved around the boys on the cruise ship. He turned to Jim and said, "About that shotgun." Jim just smiled. This time, Gwen nodded when she heard him. After dinner, the girls went to chat with one of their friends. Gwen talked about their trip and shared everything they did. She also mentioned taking the girls there, maybe next summer. Jim turned to Gerald and asked for more information. "Jim, we went as volunteers this year, and it didn't cost us anything except for getting there. If we take the girls, I think we would want to go as guests and not work. So I was thinking about renting that RV again to drive there and back. We could see the Grand Canyon and other cool places. A week at the retreat will cost about $800 total for all 4 of us." "If you don't want to rent the RV, we could use our van instead," Jim said, and Pam agreed. Gerald and Gwen exchanged smiles. They had a plan for next year and enough time to save money and organize their trip. They decided to wait a bit before telling the girls until everything was set. When school began, both girls were officially in high school as 9th graders. They quickly adapted to their new schedule and ended up in several classes together. Sherilyn picked art, while Jenny chose music. One downside was that the doctor told Sherilyn not to play volleyball to help her leg heal properly. She felt sad about this, but made a thoughtful choice. Sherilyn talked to the coach and asked if she could help as the trainer and assistant. The coach was surprised but happy to have her help, even though she couldn't play. Sherilyn became a great assistant, taking care of many tasks for the coach and cheering for the team with enthusiasm. Sherilyn had also grown a couple of inches, just as Gwen said she would. Jenny reached 5'8", and Sherilyn grew to 5'6". Both girls were becoming more mature and confident. Gwen came back to school feeling refreshed, and Gerald continued to tutor her 2 days a week. They kept going to the Saturday market, and everyone there knew them as part of the group. As the holiday season approached, Gwen and Sherilyn were very quiet about their plans and spent many afternoons shopping. Gerald had already chosen gifts for them and went about his usual routine. On Christmas morning, he woke up, went outside, and saw a shiny new grill with a smoker and a rotisserie. He was puzzled about how it got there until he noticed tire tracks from Jim's van and a note that said, "From Santa Claus." When he went to their house for breakfast with them and their parents, he brought 2 big boxes and placed them in front of the surprised girls. Sherilyn let out a joyful squeal when she tore through the wrapping paper and found a new tablet. She realized she could use it at school and still use her laptop at home for homework. Gwen was slow to open her box until her mother encouraged her to take a look. Hers wasn't filled with paper. It had a new computer and printer. Her old one was always giving her trouble, so she often had to come over to use Gerald's computer. His kindness made her happy, so she gave him a hug on the cheek. After breakfast, Gwen's parents left to go back home and work the next day. Sherilyn was busy downloading apps and chatting with Jenny. Gerald and Gwen sat on the porch with their coffee and talked. "I can't believe you got that grill to the house without me hearing you." While Pam and I were picking up Sherry and Jenny, Jim took it off the truck and brought it in. It was dark, and we thought you wouldn't go outside until the morning. I hope you like it. Like it? I've been wanting to get a new one. The old one is too worn out to use safely. We noticed. They sat quietly for a few minutes. Then Gwen spoke again, sounding a little nervous. Gerald, there's something I'd like to talk to you about. It's personal. You know I can talk to you about anything. What's on your mind? Gerald, we've been friends for 6 years, and I couldn't ask for a better friend, neighbor, or supporter than you, but, this is harder than I thought it would be. She took a deep breath. Gerald, it's been 3 years since my divorce was final, and honestly, I'd like to go out sometimes, like on a date. I get asked out often by guys at work, but none of them interest me. Do you? Would you? Oh no, I'm messing this up. Would you like to go out with me? When he didn't answer, she felt worried that he might say no. When she dared to look at him, she saw his face was very red and he was struggling to find the right words. Gerald, just tell me what you want to say. I don't want this to come between us. He kept his gaze down as he began to speak. Gwen, from the first day I saw you, I thought you were one of the most remarkable and intelligent women I have ever met. But you were still married, so I knew I should only think of you as a friend. I worried when Sherry called me Daddy. After your divorce, I didn't speak up because I cared about our friendship too much. I didn't want to say or do something that might hurt it. I have wanted to ask you out for a long time, but I never felt it was the right moment. Now that you bring it up, I feel foolish for not asking you sooner. I guess I'm not great at dating or socializing. Gerald, if you were different in any way, I might not feel the same. I can't really say for sure because I can't picture you any other way than how you are. Honestly, I have thought about us going out together since before my divorce. I'm not sure how ready I am for a relationship, but I want to see if you feel the same way. I don't know what you'll think, but I'm open to it if you are. He took a deep breath and asked, Gwen, would you like to go out on New Year's Eve? I would really enjoy that, Gerald. There is a party I want to go to, but besides that, I would love to be anywhere with you. From the living room, they heard someone say, Gerald, it's time to make a move. Gerald replied, Sure, we can go to the party, but I think we should find someone to watch Jenny first. He smiled. I don't need a babysitter, silly. Besides, I'm staying the night with Jenny. Gerald then said, We could take her with us and drop her off at the shelter. Gerald, you care about me and you know it, so stop joking around. Everyone in town thinks you two are practically engaged anyway. Just make your move. Both Gwen and Gerald turned a bit red, but he leaned in, and they shared a brief moment of connection. That is so cool. I can't wait to tell Jenny that you two finally did something. They heard footsteps running away from the window. Gerald, I think we might be in trouble. I think you're right, but let's just take things slow for now. Gwen smiled and said, I like that idea. That night and into the future, most people didn't see many changes between Gwen and Gerald. Those who did notice saw that they often held hands or had their arms around each other. They rarely took two cars anywhere, except when Gwen met him right after school. They respected their promise to one another and moved at a steady pace, keeping their connection to simple goodnight gestures and occasionally a longer embrace during special moments. That summer, the girls went to a retreat where they shared a room with twin beds. The girls stayed in a room next door. At the retreat, the two girls made the most of every class and tried every adventure. They made friends with other kids, and they all ate and played together. The leaders and counselors noticed this and appreciated it. This allowed Gwen and Gerald to focus on the skills they learned the year before. Gerald kept busy in the pottery barn, while Gwen happily wove placemats and runners for her and her parents. They also found time to work on community projects with some friends from last year. Every evening, they joined the Vespers, a time for reflection. All four of them sat together, except when Jenny joined the choir, which formed every week. She even sang a solo one evening. They all wanted to stay longer but needed to go home before Election Day to vote. Jim felt safe in his job because he only had one challenger. He ran for office because he thought every person in politics should have someone running against them. The two girls were really happy because they learned that once they reached college, they could help out as volunteers or even spend the summer as camp leaders. They promised each other that they would return. At home, Gwen and Gerald maintained their routine of sharing meals together and going out on at least one outing each week. Their activities were simple, yet enjoyable. They went to the movies sometimes, explored local festivals, and attended a couple of concerts. Often, they brought along the girls, but the girls usually wandered off, leaving Gwen and Gerald to enjoy their time together. They both valued this time and savored every moment. For Thanksgiving, Gwen's parents invited both of them, along with Jim, Pam, and Jenny, to join them for dinner. They all climbed into Jim's van and drove for 2 hours to a suburban area where they lived. Gerald brought 2 loaves of bread, a bag of buns, and some special dinner rolls he baked for the meal. While final touches were made for dinner, they watched the football game. Finally, everyone gathered around for a moment of gratitude and enjoyed a big meal together. The drive home was quiet because everyone felt content from the meal, and they had 2 platters of leftovers with them. Gwen's parents often bought sherry buns from the store, but they praised the freshness and flavor of the ones Gerald made. On Christmas morning, Gerald walked into the house for breakfast carrying a large box with Gwen's name on it. Sherilyn looked at him with curiosity and tried to coax him into revealing what was inside. After breakfast, Gerald casually told her to go outside to his truck to get something. She hurried outside but returned with a puzzled expression. "Gerald, your truck isn't out there. There's a Jeep or something. Whose is it?" "Oh, didn't I mention? That's your Christmas gift." Her eyes widened in surprise. Once the words sank in, she dashed back outside. Gwen and Gerald exchanged knowing smiles. He and Jim had found 2 Jeeps that were in great condition but needed new tires and some repairs. They got a good deal on both, so they decided to give them to the girls now, even though they wouldn't get their licenses until summer. She returned to the kitchen and asked, "Where are the keys?" Gerald put on a light-hearted expression and said, "What keys? There weren't any included." "You're joking. Hand them over." She stretched out her hand. "Nope. The keys are your mom's Christmas gift. You can't have them until you turn 16 and have your driver's license. But I have my learner's permit. You know I'm a good driver. You taught me." "I know, but what would it look like if Jim stopped you for driving without a license?" "He wouldn't do that." "Yes, he would, and he should. I don't want to see a reckless 15-year-old driving these roads without a license. That could lead to problems." "Mom, talk to him." "He's being stubborn again. He'll take you out to practice driving after you get dressed and we have another cup of coffee." Sherilyn realized she was still in her nightshirt and hurried to her bedroom to change. Gwen and Gerald exchanged smiles. When she came out, they were still sipping their coffee, so she went outside to look at her new car. Just then, another Jeep pulled into their driveway and stopped. Jenny jumped out and shouted, "Look what I got!" Sherilyn beamed. "Look at mine!" The 2 girls squealed with delight and danced around together. Jim stepped out slowly and headed into the kitchen. "Do you have anything other than coffee? I think it would be easier to watch rather than teach a teenager how to drive." "I'll let them take a turn. Please sit down and enjoy your coffee," Gerald replied. Gerald stepped outside to find the 2 girls admiring their cars. He walked over and said, "Listen up. Rule 1 is if you harm someone else's car or property, you lose your car. Rule 2 is if you crash it, you have to buy your next one. Any questions?" The girls nodded, understanding his instructions. They both replied, "Yes, Gerald. And we get it, Gerald. All right, let's take a drive. Sherilyn, you go first, since Jenny has already driven her car." They got into Sherilyn's Jeep. After giving her some simple instructions, she drove carefully onto the street. They drove for 30 minutes before they changed places, and Jenny drove them back home. When they arrived back, Gerald reminded them, "Rule 3, you can only drive with a parent until you have your licenses. Got it?" "Yes, Gerald. We are so excited, but we understand." "Thank you, Daddy," Sherilyn said with a big hug. They went inside and found Jim ready to go. He and Jenny drove back home. This time, Jenny drove more carefully, and Jim felt much more relaxed. Gerald encouraged Gwen to open her box. She squealed and giggled, just like Sherilyn did when Gerald took the item out of the box and placed it on the kitchen table. It was a loom, just like the ones she had used at the retreat. There were also several rolls of yarn and tools to help her get started. Gerald smiled as she gently touched it and moved the arm back and forth. Then she hugged him tightly and thanked him. Following Gwen's cue, Sherilyn went into the next room and brought out their gift for Gerald. It was a brand new chainsaw. Gerald admired it in the same way Gwen had with the loom. He also gave each of them a big hug. He couldn't stop smiling. Gwen finished making Christmas dinner with Gerald's help, and they enjoyed a nice, easy meal together. When they were done eating, both Gwen and Sherilyn noticed that Gerald had grown quiet. This meant he was thinking about something important. They decided to give him some space to sort out his thoughts. After dinner, Gwen made some coffee, Sherilyn went to her room, and Gerald stepped out onto the porch. When the coffee was ready, Gwen joined him and offered him a cup. He placed it on the table beside him. Then he started to speak. "Gwen, the first 6 years with you were amazing. This past year has been even better than that by a lot. Honestly, I think I've always loved you. But after this last year, I just know that I don't want to imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" By some chance, a ring appeared in his hand, and he held it out to her. Gwen started to cry and covered her mouth with her hands. A voice from the living room called through the window. "Mom, just say yes and enjoy the moment. Go to your room and play. I will do this my way. You're not writing my lines." She took a deep breath and said, "Gerald, I think I have loved you for much longer than you realize. This past year has made that feeling even stronger. Yes, I will marry you. I want to be with you more than anything else." Gerald turned to the window and asked, "Is that okay with you?" It could have been better, but it was good enough. "Go to your room and come up with something fun to do." "Fine. You two just sit there and enjoy each other's company. I'm going to send a note to Jenny that you two finally figured things out." They heard her footsteps move toward her bedroom. "Did we figure things out?" Gerald asked. "I think we finally let go of our worries and fears." She held out her hand, and Gerald gently put the simple diamond ring on her left hand. She stood up and sat next to him, sharing a heartfelt moment together. A week later, they went to Gwen's New Year's party and stayed for a while. Sherilyn was spending the night at Jenny's house as usual. When they got home late, Gerald hugged Gwen and wished her good night like he always did. When he finished, Gwen said, "Gerald, come inside." "Gwen, it's late and—" "Gerald, that wasn't a suggestion." She took his hand and led him through the house to her room. Gerald didn't leave until noon the next day. Then he took a long nap while Gwen went to pick up Sherilyn. That night at dinner, Sherilyn finally asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "So when is the wedding?" Gwen replied. "We haven't discussed it yet." "Then what have you been up to?" "Oh, forget I asked that." She turned bright red. Gerald said, "Has anyone told you that you're growing up way too fast?" "Yes, you have. Get used to it, Dad. Wow, it feels so different to say that now." Gerald answered, "I know. It really sounds different to me, too." They all shared a smile. Spring flew by. Gerald and Gwen talked about a wedding date but decided to take their time. Sherilyn continued to do well in school. After the midterm report cards were released, it was announced that Jenny and Sherilyn were ranked 3rd and 4th in their class of 200. Both girls were proud, but wondered how they could move up to the top 2 spots. The biggest surprise for Gerald came in April when Sherilyn was asked to the junior-senior prom. He realized he was not ready for her to go out with a boy. Gerald spoke with Gwen, and she assured him that the boy was a good kid. She had taught him back in elementary school and knew his parents well. Still, Gerald felt uneasy. On the night of the prom, he was anxious until he knew Gwen was home safe and tucked in her bed. After that, he took a sip of scotch and headed to bed himself. In the spring, Gerald started to add another section to his house. He didn't tell anyone about it. He just began the work. Like before, he put up the walls and roof quickly. He then focused on the inside during the hot summer days. Sherilyn even noticed the new section and was surprised by it. The addition made the house have a U-shape, with a patio and deck in the middle, complete with a grill and a brick oven. It also created a new bedroom and bathroom. Gerald and Gwen had talked about their future. They decided they would move into his house first, and then fix up her house to sell it, along with the 2 acres of land near the road. They would keep the 3 acres behind her house and start an orchard. The way their lands were shaped made an L shape, which allowed easy access to the garden on the right and the orchard straight ahead. When he wasn't busy with the house, Gerald was moving the fence and planting trees. He chose different kinds of trees like native pecans, plums, and pears, and also planted several rows of blackberries. That summer, Jim and Pam planned to take their daughters on a road trip to the East Coast, exploring new areas they hadn't visited before. This trip was set to last for 2 weeks. Because of this, Gwen and Gerald signed up to spend another 2 weeks at the village. Since their past visits had gone so well, they were warmly welcomed back and asked to help with the maintenance and gardening teams again. Gwen and Gerald were happy to agree. For this trip, they got ready with some good preparation. After a lot of emails with the village, Gerald gathered the tools and supplies he needed. Gwen also looked for different garden tools and supplies. Since they found so much, Gerald bought a pickup truck that was converted into a trailer. They packed all their things into the truck bed and securely tied a tarp over it. Gerald planned to leave a few days before Gwen. He would drive the trailer to the boat dock where it would go on the weekly supply barge. Then he drove to Seattle to pick up Gwen after she had said goodbye to Sherilyn for their trip. They spent a day in Seattle before driving over the mountains to catch the passenger boat to the village. When they arrived, the villagers welcomed them warmly. They started another wonderful working vacation in the mountains. This time they pushed their twin beds together and slept well each night. After the Friday night service, which was always uplifting, Gwen said while they walked back to their room, "I would really like to get married here. It's a lovely place to begin our life together." Gerald nodded in agreement, and the thought lingered in his mind. Before long, their 2-week trip came to an end, and they drove back home to return to everyday life. With the new school year approaching, they quickly adapted to their routines. Sherilyn and Jenny were now in their junior year of high school, excelling in their studies and taking on leadership roles among their peers. They each enrolled in advanced classes in math and science and participated in a college preparatory course. Gwen began school as she always did, involving herself in various activities. Gerald continued his tutoring sessions 2 mornings each week. It seemed that his hard work was paying off. The school's scores in math and science had improved, surpassing those of nearby schools. The principal received several inquiries from other schools interested in their success, and he spoke proudly about the dedication of the teachers and the support from parents. He mentioned their tutoring program but remained modest to avoid drawing too much attention to Gerald. Meanwhile, Gerald stayed focused on each child, making lessons engaging and personal. One day in early October, he returned home after tutoring to find many cars parked in front of his house. Curious, he parked and stepped outside to see what was happening. A crowd of local and regional news reporters had gathered, with a prominent figure at the center. He moved closer to hear what was being said. A man spoke into multiple microphones. "I can tell you for sure that just 10 years ago this land was just open fields. Look at it now. This transformation wouldn't have happened without the farm aid that I have consistently supported, which is currently stalled in Congress. It assists small farmers and landowners just as it has here. It's time for those against this bill to reconsider and allow it to help more people. Thank you." The man quickly entered his limousine and drove away. Gerald turned to the person next to him and asked, "Who was that?" The man looked at him and said, "You don't know? He is the representative for this area and a strong member of the Agriculture Committee." "Well, he doesn't seem to understand the situation." "What do you mean?" the man asked. "Do you know who owns this place?" "I should. It's mine, and I've never used any government funding or assistance here." "Hi, I'm Mike Powell from TXT News. Can you show me around and tell me about your property? I'd also like to record some video if that's okay." "Sure, I don't mind, although not many people have shown much interest in what I do here." As the other reporters left, only a small news crew remained. Gerald opened the gate while Mike spoke with his team. Instead of driving, Gerald chose to walk with Mike, who was recording his story. Gerald pointed out the trees and bushes he had planted and explained where he got them from. He showed Mike his garden and the small area he started in his first year, which he added to each year. Then he took him to the orchard he planted this year and finally down to the house, barn, and other buildings. He pointed to the original building and his two new parts. He showed the barn and explained how he made it using recycled materials he collected from other places. He mentioned that the equipment was bought second-hand and fixed up to work well again. He talked about the early days when he just tried to grow enough food to eat and then started selling at the market. As he walked Mike back to the gate, he said, "If any government money was used on this place, I have no idea where it went. I don't know much about the farm bill, but I can promise you that this property never got any help from it." The newsman thanked him for the tour and told him to watch the news that night to see the story. Gerald didn't think about it much for the rest of the afternoon while he painted the new bedroom in the addition. When he finished cleaning up, he walked over to Gwen's house for dinner. She opened the door and asked, "Gerald, what happened today?" "Jim called to remind you to watch the news at 6 o'clock tonight because you were going to be on television." Gerald shared what had happened and shrugged. Being on TV didn't matter much to him. He cared more about having dinner with Gwen and Sherilyn. When 6 o'clock came, Gwen turned on the TV and they watched the news together. Meanwhile, 150 miles away in a hotel room at the state capitol, Gerald's ex-wife was finishing her makeup. She heard her husband shout, "That guy still doesn't get how this works." She stepped out just as the camera was showing a lovely driveway, garden, and orchard, then focusing on a house and barn. The news reporter shared how the owner built everything by hand without any help from the government. "Who are you talking about?" her husband asked, clearly annoyed. He didn't want to say Gerald's name, so he replied, "Some farmer just made Tommy Fielder look bad on the news." "Well, Tommy Fielder is not the brightest. What's the big deal?" "Tommy Fielder might not be smart, but he's powerful. If I want to be governor next year, I need him on my side. As I've said before, I don't care if you want to be governor, but I'm not coming back to this awful state unless you get me a nice place to stay. If you buy me that farm they showed on the news, then I'll move back. No farm, and you can come back alone." She walked away to the bathroom, and her husband quietly muttered something unkind. The news then switched to an interview with the local sheriff, who spoke highly of Gerald Murphy's integrity. He had known Gerald for nearly 10 years and was confident that he had never received any government money to build his home. Then the sheriff made a statement that would be repeated often over the next year. "Now that I think about it, I can't name one small farmer in this county who has received any money from the agriculture department." Reporters then asked the sheriff if he planned to run for a position in the next election. The sheriff didn't give a clear answer, but he didn't deny it either. His wife returned to the room and put on her coat. "Where are you off to?" "I have plans. I probably won't be back tonight." "What do you see in him?" "Honestly, I don't focus much on outward appearances. That's not what I appreciate about him." "Just be cautious. I don't want to hear about my wife spending time with another man." "You wanted a beautiful wife and now you have one. I've been by your side every time we went out. Don't start causing problems for me now. Where are your two kids? I hope they aren't coming home tonight." "They're probably out enjoying themselves. And don't worry, they appreciate being away from you just as much as you enjoy being away from them. They'll stay out. Just keep them on the right path for a couple of years. Once we're in the governor's mansion for 2 terms, then we can move to Washington. I'll get them into Yale or another good school, and they can manage their own lives if they can stay in their studies. Just remember, buy me that place and everything will be okay. No farm and you are on your own." She turned and walked out of the room. "Ugh," he muttered, but a plan began to take shape in his mind. "Yes, that's the way to go. Let's talk about Gerald Murphy again and see if we can secure funding from Tommy's agriculture committee to create new farming methods. That sounds promising." He spent the next hour on the phone with one of his team members and then made a call to set up a meeting for the evening. Gerald had no idea about the plans forming after the television interview. Gwen and Sherilyn were pleased with his interview and Jim's as well. The reality was that Tommy Fielder was a name many knew, but very few could identify him in a crowd. He rarely visited the area except to announce something political, like what he had done that day. Unfortunately, Gerald's interview had also made national news, sparking many discussions about the Farm Bill and the actions of the Agriculture Committee, Gerald was focused on his own work and didn't pay much attention to anything else. One Sunday morning in early December, two significant events occurred just days apart. Gerald turned to Gwen and then to Sherilyn and started to talk. "I want to discuss Christmas." They looked at him with interest. "Something Gwen mentioned last summer gave me an idea. I have a suggestion for all of us. I would love for the three of us to go to the village for Christmas and New Year's. They have only a few rooms left for the holidays, and the only people there will be the staff. It might snow a lot, and it will be chilly. What do you think?" Both Gwen and Sherilyn smiled at the idea and quickly agreed to the plan. "There is one more thing. Gwen, would you like to get married in the village with just the three of us there? We can have another ceremony with everyone and a reception in the spring." Sherilyn jumped with joy at the idea. Gwen sat quietly, tears of happiness in her eyes. Then she said, "Gerald, you always know how to make things so special. Yes, let's do that." By nighttime, Gerald had made all the plans. They would travel to Seattle to get a marriage license and then head to the village. The wait would be over on Christmas Day, and they would hold the ceremony in the small chapel. They would come back home on January 2nd. Just 2 days later, there was a knock on Gwen's door right after dinner. They weren't expecting anyone and felt surprised. Not many people visited them. She opened the door and welcomed a well-dressed man into the living room. Then she went to get Gerald. "Gerald, there is a man here who wants to talk to both of us. Come on. I'm a little worried about this." Gerald frowned but followed her into the front room. The man stood up and introduced himself. Then they all sat down and he began to talk. "I'll get straight to the point. I'm a real estate agent from the capital, and I have a buyer who wants to buy 10 to 15 acres of land. He knows about your two properties and wants to offer you each $150,000 for them. This will be cash, and he hopes to finalize the deal early next year. What do you think?" Gwen looked at Gerald, whose frown had gotten deeper. He spoke up, finally saying, "We've talked about selling Miss Lambert's house and 2 acres, but the other 3 acres and my property are definitely not for sale. That will be our home until we pass away. If your client wants this house and the 2 acres, I'm sure Miss Lambert would listen to an offer. Sadly, my client is only interested in the complete 10 acres. He wants to try out some new farming techniques. Would you consider $200,000 for each property?" Considering the state of the economy, that's a fair offer. Yes, it is a good offer since the economy here hasn't improved at all, but I've already given you our answer, and I think we're done discussing this. Thank you for reaching out. I can suggest some other local places that might interest you. Thank you. We have a list of other properties. My client will be sad to hear you turn down his offer. He really likes these 2 places because of where they are located. I'm sorry to let your client down, but no thank you. Gerald stood up and walked to the dining room. Gwen showed the man out the front door. When she came back to the dining room, Gerald was on the phone. "No, Jim. He was from the capital. I have no idea. He didn't say who his client was. I was thinking the same thing. If you find out anything, please let me know." "Thanks." He turned to Gwen and said, "Jim hasn't heard about anyone looking to buy property either. He thinks there might be something happening that no one knows about. He'll let us know if he finds out anything." That makes me uneasy. Our properties are worth about half of what he was offering. Yours would be worth more because of the extra buildings, but $200,000 for 5 acres and houses like these is just too high. That's why I called Jim. He hears a lot of things from the county and his local contacts. I guess we'll just wait and see what happens. Gerald didn't realize it then, but the next step in this quiet situation would happen next summer. Until then, he kept doing his usual things, and Gwen looked forward to the wonderful Christmas ahead. They flew to Seattle and spent a day exploring Pike Place Market and getting their marriage license. They were surprised by how warm Seattle was in December. They could see snow just 20 miles away on the mountains. They took the train over the mountains, which was very exciting for Sherilyn. It was her first time on a train, and she moved from window to window, watching the snowy hills and little towns go by. The next morning, they caught a boat and reached the village 3 days before Christmas. In the village, there was a boy about Sherilyn's age who lived with his parents. He and Sherilyn became friends quickly. He showed her how to ski and walk on snowshoes on the trails and hills nearby. The pottery shop was closed for the winter, but Gwen had time to work on the big loom. She made a large blanket as a wedding gift for Gerald. Gerald spent his days helping to fix up one of the empty summer dorms. Their big surprise came the day before Christmas when a new group of visitors arrived. It turned out to be Jim, Pam, and Jenny. They decided they couldn't miss the wedding. Since Jim and Pam had never been here before, they chose to spend Christmas with their friends. After the wedding, Jim and Pam planned to return to Seattle for a few days to visit Pam's sister. Her sister Jenny had moved there 2 years ago. Jenny was going to stay with Sherilyn and learn to ski and snowboard. On Christmas Day, Gerald woke up slowly. He was in a small bed, and Sherilyn was in the other one. He got up, got dressed, and went to make coffee for himself and Gwen. While walking, he thought about the disagreement from the night before. Sherilyn had won that one. She and Jenny had convinced Gwen and Gerald that they should keep things as they were. Pam didn't help them. She sided with the girls. Jim just rolled his eyes and tried to stay out of it. Jenny spent the night in her parents' room, while Gerald stayed in Sherilyn's room. When he came back with 2 steaming cups of coffee, he found a smiling Sherilyn waiting at Gwen's door. "No, Daddy, you can't see her until the ceremony," she said. She took one of the cups from him and went on, "Go have breakfast and then use one of your tools until 11 o'clock. After that, you can come back here, clean up, and get dressed. Be at the chapel by noon. Got it? You know, you're not so grown up that I can't give you a little punishment. You've never been mad at me, much less tried to punish me, and you're not going to start on your wedding day. Now go!" The words wedding day echoed in his mind as he went downstairs for a quick breakfast. Instead of following Sherilyn's advice to go to the shop, he decided to take a walk in the woods, thinking back on the last 9 years. He felt calm and happy, much more than he had at his first big, fancy wedding. But deep down, he felt that Gwen was the perfect woman for him. He went back to the now empty room at 11 o'clock to clean up and get ready. Putting on his clothes for the wedding was easy because he chose new jeans and a flannel shirt with a warm top underneath. Gwen would wear something similar, but Sherilyn and Jenny had a surprise outfit for her. There would be no flowers since it was too cold for them to grow in the mountains. They wanted a simple look, and that's what they got. He stood inside the chapel talking with the minister, who was staying there for the winter while writing a book. When Jim arrived, he knew the moment was getting closer. Jim stood next to him as the recorded music began to play. The other villagers who were also staying for the winter stood up, and then the door opened. Jenny walked in first, followed by Pam. They wore matching flannel shirts and jeans. Then Sherilyn entered, holding a bouquet of fake flowers. She wore a light green blouse made of soft silk over her jeans. Gwen stepped into the doorway with a big smile, and Gerald fell in love with her all over again. She had on a veil with small white flowers and held a bouquet of fake flowers. Her blouse was a lighter green than Sherilyn's, but had lace that looked like a wedding dress. Wearing jeans made the outfit even more special. The ceremony was quick, and when they left the chapel, everyone playfully tossed fluffy snowballs at them. The group of 20 people moved to the cafeteria where they all enjoyed grilled salmon and vegetables for the wedding meal. The cake was simple, with 2 layers and light green icing topped with a little bride and groom. Everyone ate the whole cake in no time. Afterward, the couple left for their honeymoon, which was probably one of the shortest on record. They took a walk by the creek, enjoying the crisp air while keeping warm in their mittens. Their happy time together lasted about 30 minutes, but then their hands got too cold. They decided to go inside to sit by the fire and enjoy some coffee. Gwen looked very happy, and Gerald had the smile of a man looking forward to a bright future. The next day, Pam and Jim left on the boat. The happy couple and the 2 girls spent the week skiing and keeping warm. They even got Gwen to try skiing for the first time. To her surprise, she really enjoyed it. She and Gerald went skiing for an hour every day. On New Year's Eve, she finished her blanket and shared it with everyone that night. Year 9, on January 2nd, the 4 of them took the boat and arrived at the train station in Seattle. Jim and Pam picked them up and drove them to Pam's sister's house. Gerald was happy to see that Pam's sister was as easygoing and friendly as Pam was lively. They spent the night in the guest house and took the morning flight home. Everyone was tired and used the next day to rest. When school started again, Sherilyn and Gwen settled back into their routine. Gerald began moving things from Gwen's house to his own. The first items to go were the beds. Gwen and Gerald decided her bed was much more comfortable than his old one. By the end of the week, most of Gwen's belongings had been moved over, and Gerald started selling or giving away items that the girls didn't want anymore. When the midterm report cards were released, Jenny came in second and Sherilyn third in their class. The girl who had been first had moved away. Both girls committed to catching up to the new number one. Luckily, they didn't have to try too hard, as the new top student struggled during the spring after she started focusing on other interests. At the end of the school year, Jenny and Sherilyn were firmly in the first and second places in their class. They joked with each other about their standings, but deep down, neither girl really minded as long as they both finished at the top. One day in March, there was a big announcement in town about a long-awaited highway that would finally be built. When Gerald learned that the highway would go around his property, over a mile away, he didn't worry about it much at first. A month later, he noticed two men looking at the road near his land. Curious, he went outside and asked them what they were doing. They told him they were measuring the land next door for the new highway. It turned out that none of the surrounding land had been sold or measured in more than 40 years. They needed to go back another mile to find a good marker and were working their way toward the next property. Gerald showed them the survey markers on the corners of his land, and they thanked him. This would make their work much easier. Time went by, and school came to an end. The girls wanted to return to the village for the summer, but then Jim and Pam offered them a trip to Italy for a month. Pam had received money from a trust fund and needed to spend some of it to broaden her horizons. She felt that Italy was the perfect place for this. They planned to go in late July and stay until the week before school started in August. Jim would stay at home. Because of this, Gerald and Gwen made plans for another 2-week visit to the village, with a long drive back through Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. 2 weeks before their trip was set to begin, Gwen and Gerald got registered letters. The letters informed them that the state would take control of their property to build a new highway. A meeting would take place in early September if they wanted to challenge this notice. Gerald sat in Jim's office a half-hour later. Jim explained the law and Gerald's choices. When he finished, he said, "Gerald, I can't understand how or why you and Gwen's properties ended up on this list. First, you live more than a mile from the proposed freeway. Second, they wouldn't put you on the list without trying to buy your land first." He didn't mention a freeway at all, but last fall a man from the capital came to us with a high offer for our properties. He only wanted to buy both, not just Gwen's land. We said no, and that was the end of it. That is a bit strange, but that could have been the offer. These kinds of deals can be complicated, and it's hard to figure out who is behind all this or why it's happening. I'll ask some questions and see what I can find, but I'm not feeling hopeful. I think you and Gwen should have a talk and figure out what you want to do. You can try to make an appeal, but there is a lot of money and many strong people involved in this project. I really doubt you would win the appeal. I'm sorry, but sometimes that's just how things are. So I just lose everything, and there's not much I can do about it? Pretty much, yes. This offer is only for the land. After the hearing, they will send you a final document. It will say what they are claiming, how much they will pay you, and when they will take ownership. That will be the last word from the state. If they only claim the land, which is common for highway projects, everything else on the property belongs to you, and you can take it with you. That means you can keep your equipment and any improvements. People have been known to move their houses, and some have even destroyed theirs so that no one else can live there. Is that allowed? In this case, yes. You're actually helping the state by clearing the land. It's your property, and you can do what you want until the state takes it over. But if you do start a fire and it spreads to your neighbor's house, I will have to hold you responsible. So make sure the fire doesn't get out of control. Jim chuckled. Gerald smiled and shook his head. Jim, why don't you run for governor or something? I know you're good at making deals, but I think you would at least want things to be clear and honest. Gerald, I trust you to keep this to yourself, even from Gwen. But Fielder is stepping down, and a lot of it is because of the trouble from that TV interview. I've been asked to run for his spot in Congress. Don't be surprised if you hear that I'm leaving, Gerald said. Gerald looked at his friend and said, "You have our support." Jim stood up and shook hands with Gerald. "Thanks," he replied. That evening, Sherilyn and Jenny went shopping for things they needed for their trip. Gerald sat down with Gwen and told her everything Jim had shared. When he finished, Gwen looked at him and asked, "What do you want to do, my dear? I will follow you anywhere, and we will figure this out together." "Gwen, I'm not sure yet. I think we should talk about our choices after the final meeting and we get the official news, but we should start thinking about where we want to go." "I've been thinking about it too, but I don't want to say anything in front of Sherilyn. Let's wait until we get to the village to talk about it. In fact, I prefer we keep this quiet until spring. This is her last year in high school and it should be filled with good memories. I don't want this to cause any problems for her." Gerald looked at her and said, "You always thought I was the one with the answers, but you were wrong. You've figured things out better than I have." "No, I've learned to think a bit like you, and I get my strength from you. We will get through this and do well. I believe that." "Well then, Mrs. Murphy, should we go out for dinner, stay in, or do something relaxing?" "You know what choice I would make without you even asking. Come on, we probably have an hour." When Sherilyn got home with a bunch of bags for the trip, she found them making soup and grilled cheese sandwiches at 8:30 at night. "What have you two been up to since 6 o'clock tonight?" "Oh, never mind. Forget I asked that. I don't want to know. Actually, I do know. I just don't want you to tell me." "Parents don't do that kind of thing." Gerald gave her a cheeky smile and said, "You wouldn't believe it, but we went to see the races at the lake and saw all of your friends." Gwen playfully hit his arm. "No, I don't want to hear about that. La 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 la," she said as she went into her room. They helped the girls and Pam get on the plane, then went home to pack for their trip. Instead of waiting, they left at 6 o'clock that evening and drove until they were too tired to continue. They reached their destination and took the boat early in the morning, enjoying lunch in the cafeteria the day before they were meant to arrive. That afternoon, Gwen shared her idea with him. She thought he might ask a lot of questions, but instead he just said, "I love it. Let's do it, no matter what happens." She smiled and gave him a hug. At that moment, he understood most of what he needed to know. There was still one question that puzzled him, but it didn't seem as important as the others, even though it still bothered him a little. The question was, why? The next day, they started their third round of volunteer work. They quickly put their future plans aside and focused on the job at hand. 2 weeks later, after getting off the boat and picking up his truck, they finally talked about their future for the first time since arriving. Gwen said, "I really love this village. It feels a lot like our town. Just big enough to feel homey and small enough to feel friendly. I think I could live here. Let's take a drive and check out the area. We haven't done that yet." They drove around, enjoying the sights. Because of this, they decided to stay in the town for 3 more days and met several people. One person in particular said they would contact them soon. Since they stayed longer than planned, they needed to drive straight home to be there when the group from Italy arrived. When they stepped off the airplane, neither of them could believe what they were seeing. Sherilyn and Jenny both had their hair cut into a short style that looked very trendy. They wore colorful peasant blouses and skirts, and they talked to each other in Italian. "Good morning, Mom and Dad." "Good morning to you, too. I want a hug, silly," Gerald said. Sherilyn quickly hugged her mom and then her dad. Jenny did the same with her dad. As usual, they all chatted excitedly on the way to the car. Once they got there, Sherilyn kept talking about all the amazing places she had visited. Gerald listened, even though he sometimes lost track of what she was saying. He loved seeing Sherilyn's excitement. When they reached home, Sherilyn went to her room to unpack while Gwen started making dinner. Gerald was lost in thought. After dinner, Sherilyn said, "The most interesting thing I found in Italy is how old everything is. They sell things in shops that we would keep in museums here. Mom, I brought you this necklace. I wish we could have used it for the wedding, but it will look beautiful on you." She fastened the necklace around her mother's neck. "I have a certificate saying this piece is from the 1600s and was worn by someone important. Thank you, dear. It is lovely, and I can't believe it's so old. And for you, Dad, I have 2 gifts. This is a Roman bronze coin from the time of Augustus, about 2,000 years old. I couldn't afford the gold or silver ones. Cherie, this is perfect. Just perfect, thank you. That's just one gift. I got it because it's old like you. She giggled. Oh, a special thanks for that. This is the special gift. It's a measuring tool I found in Florence. It was made during Leonardo da Vinci's time. Builders and craftsmen used it for their work. The seller said it was used by Leonardo himself, but I'm not so sure. It's probably similar to what he worked with. Sweetheart, this is amazing. I'm speechless. That's hard to believe. You always have something to say. Honey, I think you just gave him something that will keep him quiet every time he holds it in his hand, Gwen said. Gerald stood up and wrapped his arms around Sherilyn, giving her a warm hug. When he let go, Sherilyn laughed and said, Wow, for a hug like that, I should have brought him 3 old tools. Gerald just smiled back. They paused for a moment, and then Sherilyn spoke again. Mom and Dad, something else happened on the trip. Both Gwen and Gerald paid close attention. No, it's nothing like that. Do you think Pam would let us out of her sight for even a minute? They both relaxed and were ready to listen. Jenny and I decided where we want to go to college next year. Now, before you say anything, please hear me out. Pam's sister works in the admissions office at Seattle University. After hearing Pam talk about us, she spoke with the head of admissions, who then called the school for a copy of our records. They also checked out our SAT scores. We haven't got them yet, but they could see them. They have given us half scholarships for the first year, and we might get a full scholarship after that. She came to Italy and brought us their catalog, applications, and school information. It is a private Jesuit college not far from downtown Seattle. It is pricey, but with a half scholarship, the cost would be about the same as what we pay here in our state. She offered to let us stay in her guest house, which would help us save a lot of money. We talked, and this is where we want to go. I know it is far from home, but you will probably visit the village each year, and I can picture you there. It is one of the top 10 universities in the West. I know you have questions, and if I can't answer them, you can call Pam or her sister. She stopped talking and waited for the flood of questions she hoped she was ready for. The first voice she heard was Gerald. Gwen, what do you think? I don't know about you, but I think it's a great idea. I agree, it's a perfect choice. Have you filled out the application yet, Sherry? Hold on a second, something feels off. You both agreed so quickly. What's going on? Gerald, you explain it. Sweetheart, your mom and I already decided that we would support you no matter what you choose about college. The only surprise for me is that you want to go to a small private school instead of a big one. But I think the school is a good choice. It has a great reputation. You do? Yes, even though I keep to myself a lot. I try to know what's going on in the world. I didn't mean that. I meant, don't worry about it. But things have been happening here too, and there's something we need to tell you, Gerald said. He explained about the highway and the land laws that allow it. You mean they're going to take our land and build a highway? They are going to demolish our houses? Where will you live? Have you talked to Uncle Jim? Of course you have. What will you do? Gerald answered, Sweetheart, we talked to Jim. He said we could try to stop it, but he thinks we would lose and make some important people very angry. So, we decided not to fight. Mom, where will you go? That's what we want to share with you. As Gwen explained their plans, a big smile spread on Sherilyn's face. This is perfect. You guys are amazing. Does Jim know yet? Only a little. We just made these plans a couple of weeks ago. We will tell him and Pam after the big meeting next month when we know all the details. Oh, wow. This is so exciting. I can't wait for school to start. Just be careful not to mess up your scholarship, Gwen said. I won't. Jenny and I want to be first and second in our class and give speeches at graduation, said Gerald. Oh no, that means 2 long speeches. I hope the teachers can teach them that only some speakers go on for hours, Gerald joked. Gerald Murphy, Gwen said with a smile and playfully hit his arm. Sherilyn just smiled back. School started with the usual chaos and changes. Gerald decided he wouldn't tutor this year because of other responsibilities. The principal was disappointed, but understood he had important things to do. 2 weeks later, there was a big meeting at City Hall. Surprisingly, no one at the meeting spoke up against the letters about the land. A few people asked questions like how much they would be paid for their property. The speaker said they would pay $25,000 for each acre of land. which was more than what most people paid in the area. Someone asked when the sale would really happen. The speaker replied that the change of ownership would happen at midnight on May 31st of next year. The money would be sent electronically at that time, and the ownership would change then, too. One person wanted to know what they could take with them and what they should leave behind. The speaker explained that for most of the land, they only wanted the land itself. People could take whatever else they wanted. If they left anything behind, they should think about it being removed or damaged during the construction work. Gerald felt that all his questions were answered except for one. He would have to wait for the official paper to find out if it was just land or included something more. It didn't really matter to him because he didn't plan on using any of the buildings. He just wanted to learn all the details. 2 weeks later, two important things happened on the same day. The first was that he got a registered letter confirming the purchase of their land for $25,000 per acre at midnight on May 31st. Now Gerald knew that it was just a land deal in case he changed his mind about the buildings. The second was a letter from the lawyers for the man in Washington, confirming their upcoming agreement. The deal was just as they had discussed. When Gwen got home, she was just as pleased as he was with the news. Gerald sent an email to the lawyer saying he would come to their office in 1 week to finalize and sign the papers. They replied to his message the next morning. By that time, Gerald was busy loading his trailer with tools and items he wouldn't need for a while. 2 days later, he bid Gwen goodbye and started his drive to Washington. He arrived in the morning for his appointment and checked into a motel for the night to freshen up. He got to the meeting on time and greeted the older man, who expressed his gratitude for partnering on the agreement. They quickly signed the papers, and a check for $10,000 was handed over. The deal also stated that Gerald would pay an extra $50,000 after the land deal process was completed. They outlined a tentative date for that payment in early June of the next year, at which time they would also determine the final sale price and closing date. Gerald made plans with the man to drop off his belongings in the morning. Then he went to have an early dinner and fell asleep before the 10 o'clock news. The next day, he drove to the older man's place to unload his items in the spot the man had cleared for him. Then he got back on the highway and started the long drive home. He drove carefully and reached the area around noon on Thursday. About 20 miles from home, he decided to stop for lunch because he was hungry and tired. He found a table in the corner and ordered coffee while he waited for his food. 2 men were sitting in a booth next to him, chatting. Gerald felt too tired to pay attention, but then he heard something that caught his interest. "Why does the boss want us to watch this guy?" one of the men asked. "Because he doesn't want that guy to take any drastic actions," the other replied. "Why would he do that? That would be unwise. People make poor decisions all the time. If this guy learns that the boss is interested in his property, he might react strongly. That doesn't make much sense. Look, here's the deal. If this information gets out, we could lose our jobs or worse. So keep your mouth shut about this." "Got it? Yeah, I understand. So the boss had some history with this guy. He took everything important from him. I can't say anything more about that because I don't know and I don't care. Now the boss wants to run for governor of this troubled state, but his ex-wife won't come back unless he purchases her this farm. I think she wants it for a getaway. She's attractive, and I wouldn't mind getting to know her better. Good luck with that. She tends to favor individuals with wealth or influence, and it's best if they have both. So the boss tried to buy this farm, but the owner said no. Then the boss used some connections and got the farm added to the list of land for a new highway they are planning. Here's the plan. The state takes control of the farm at midnight, and 30 minutes later, it's declared extra land. Then the boss can buy it just 20 minutes after that. He gets the farm for his wife. She moves here with her companion, and suddenly he becomes the next governor of the state. What about her kids? I know she has a couple. The boss doesn't care about those kids. The younger one is usually in trouble, and the girl spends her nights out with friends. As long as they stay out of major trouble, he doesn't mind what they do. So we come down here every week to make sure he doesn't mess up the property? Yep, that's our job. In the spring, we'll probably stay here and watch him until midnight on that day. That's why we have to keep everything quiet. Got it. Let's go. I'm getting tired. Me too. But we need to do this job for the money. He is paying us well, so let's earn it. The two men left a generous tip on the table and walked out. Gerald was left with a plate of cold food in front of him. Nothing mattered to him more than getting home to Gwen and hitting the road in June. He had to make it to June. After thinking for a few moments, he made several decisions. He would figure out the details later. He left a bill on the table, then went to his truck and drove home. He spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on his couch, deep in thought. Gwen found him like this when she returned home. "Gerald, what happened? Did something go wrong in Washington? Tell me." "Sit down, Gwen. Nothing went wrong in Washington, but everything went wrong here this afternoon." He told her everything he had heard. He shared every detail. When he finished, she hugged him tightly and kissed his cheek. "I'm sorry, honey. That must have been really hard for you. What are you going to do?" "Gwen, people have always called me Mr. Boy Scout. Mostly they did it to tease me. Honestly, that's how I was raised. It's who I am, and I hope to stay that way, especially for you and Sherry. But this is too much for me. I just can't ignore it this time." All I can think about is the smirk on his face as he walked out of the courtroom with my ex-wife and kids after completely disrupting my life. Gwen, for the first time, I want to get back at him. I want him to understand the impact of his actions. I won't do anything that harms you, Sherry, or myself. But I won't let him take another 10 years of my life like this. I refuse to let that happen. I will do whatever it takes to end this, but I promise you one thing. When we leave this place for the last time, it will all be behind me, and I will only think about our future together. Sweetheart, you do what you feel you need to do. I will stand by you, and so will Cherie. Just please don't do anything that could get you in trouble. I can't go through that again. Everything else is okay with me. Thank you, love. You are the first person in my life since my parents who has supported me like this. I will always be here for you, no matter what you want or need." While they were still hugging, Cherie came in with exciting news. She had received her SAT scores and earned an average of 750 on each test. Gerald pushed his own thoughts aside and celebrated with his wife and daughter. To mark the occasion, he took them out for dinner at the Mexican restaurant. He joked with Sherilyn that Seattle probably didn't have any good Mexican food, and she just smiled. In early November, Gerald made one last trip to Washington with a fully packed trailer. After this trip, the snow would make it too hard to travel. He and Gwen looked closely at their belongings and decided what to keep and what to let go. During the winter, he sold what he could and donated many items to local charities. He also sent several boxes to their Washington address. An elderly man agreed to accept the boxes and hold on to them with their belongings. He never took large loads to the charities or the shipping office that might get noticed. Instead, he dropped off items often during the winter. Year 10 in late March, he made one last trip north and brought a few things to add to what they already had. The rest went to Pam's sister's house for safekeeping until the girls arrived in June. Sherilyn and Jennifer planned to go up in June and start their classes for the summer. They talked about trying to graduate in 3 years. Gerald didn't push them either way. He simply reminded them that things might change once they were in college. They should take their time and make good choices. As April turned into May, Gwen and Gerald were left with very few things in the house. He had been careful to go about his tasks when the two girls weren't around, but now they were nearby every day. He had noticed 2 men hanging around for a while and guessed they were the same ones he had overheard before. With Jim's help, he planned to move the men away from the farm one morning. This gave him time to have a 20-foot shipping container delivered to his barn. He and Gwen worked hard to load their big items into the container. All that was left were their clothes and a few small things they would take in his truck. They had quietly sold her car to avoid drawing attention. A week later, early one morning, the container was picked up and on the road before the black car showed up for the day. He wasn't worried they would notice the container leaving, but he was careful enough not to let them trace anything going out from the farm. Jim and Pam knew about their plans, and Gerald had shared a little more with Jim about what he had found out. However, he decided not to tell Jim everything. If Jim had asked, he would have said, "It's better you don't find out." But Jim never asked. He always helped him with anything he needed. That spring, he announced he was running for Congress for an open seat, and everyone believed he would win. Pam was already making plans to move to Washington, D.C. They would keep their local house to maintain their main home. Gerald and Gwen had provided them with some furniture for their local house. Graduation was in the last week of May. The girls still didn't know who would be number 1 and number 2, but it didn't matter to them. They had their speeches ready and were prepared. They each packed their Jeep and planned to leave 2 days after graduation. They planned to celebrate all night after graduation and then take a day to rest before leaving. On graduation night, Gerald, Gwen, Pam, and Jim sat together as the graduates walked in, with the familiar music of Pomp and Circumstance playing. They got comfortable as the ceremony started with talks from the school board and the principal. Then the superintendent came up to speak. "Ladies, gentlemen, parents, and friends," he said, "I am happy to introduce this year's graduating class." The students cheered and the parents clapped. Once it was quieter, he continued, "One of the best parts of my job is to introduce the valedictorian and salutatorian, the 2 students who are at the top of their class. This year we have a special situation because there is a tie. After reviewing their records from elementary school, we found that our top students are the same. We don't have a tiebreaker. So I am proud to present our co-valedictorians, Miss Sherilyn Lambert and Jennifer Sanders." He took a step back and clapped as the audience stood up. Jenny and Sherilyn came forward, took their bows, and received their applause. Jenny approached the microphone and began, "As many of you know, Sherry and I have been friends since elementary school. We are like sisters. Instead of giving 2 separate speeches today, we decided to speak together." She stepped back, and Sherilyn moved up to the mic. "We know that some people in the audience might be expecting us to talk for a while each, but we will keep it short to surprise someone very special." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Gerald, who sat quietly. Jenny moved forward again. "To my fellow graduates, and especially to those who will graduate in the future, we want to tell you that you won't reach this stage on your own. It takes teachers, school staff, friends, and most of all, parents, to help you succeed." Sherilyn took a moment to express her feelings. "I want to thank my parents, Jim and Pam Sanders, for everything they have done for me since I was born. Your support has meant the world to me. I love you both more than I can say." She took a step back. Next, Sherilyn stepped up to the microphone. "I would like to give a special thanks to my mom. She has cared for me and been by my side since day 1. We may not always agree, but we have never really fought. I love you, Mom." Then Jenny joined her at the microphone. "There is someone else we both want to thank together." The 2 began to alternate their words as they spoke. "He has been our friend, mentor, teacher, supporter, and our guiding light. He brings comfort when things feel challenging, and he is always there for us when we have questions. He is the man who supports us no matter what." Jennifer said, "He is my uncle." Sherilyn added, "He is my dad." Together they announced, "He is our Gerald." The crowd erupted into applause, which went on for several minutes. Gerald could only sit there in surprise. Gwen took his hand and held it firmly. That was the end of their speech, and the event continued. Gerald had never felt so honored before. He didn't know how to react, so he just kept holding Gwen's hand. Soon, the graduates turned their tassels and threw their hats high in the air. Then they walked out of the auditorium while the choir sang, "You Will Never Walk Alone." Gerald was still trembling as he stood there, and Gwen guided him into the lobby to wait for the girls to join them. As he stood there and gathered his thoughts, he felt a tug on his shirt. He turned and saw a lovely young woman. "Mr. Murphy, you probably don't remember me, but I am Susie Mendleton. You helped me when I was in 3rd grade." "Of course I remember you, Susie. I just didn't recognize you. You've grown up so much." She smiled with the same bright smile she had as a little girl. "I want to thank you for helping me back then. Because of your support, I have received a lot of help, and my mind feels clearer now. I've noticed that soon things will get better for me. I also want you to know that I will graduate next year. I may not be like Sherilyn or Jennifer, but I will finish school. Susie, I am just as proud of you as I am of Sherilyn. She did her best, and you are doing your best too. That is all anyone can ask for. Do you remember Miss Lambert? She is now my wife. Gwen, this is Susie." I heard about that. Gerald is right. You are doing your best, and we are all proud of you. Thank you, miss. I have always loved reading because when I read a story, I could see it in my mind. It has never confused me like other things do. I'm getting A's in reading and writing in high school. I still find math and science tricky, but I keep using your notebook, Mr. Murphy. Gerald smiled widely. Then he noticed that Sherilyn was standing right next to them. He reached out his hand and took hers. Hi, Susie. I'm so happy you came. By the way, your story for the newspaper was fantastic. I laughed and cried while reading it. Keep doing a great job, Sherilyn said. Thank you, Sherilyn. You and Jenny have always been there for me. I hope you both do well in college next year. If we can, we'll definitely come to your graduation next year and see you get your diploma, too. I would love that, but I understand if you can't make it. Enjoy your evening. We will. Susie turned and walked towards her parents. Gwen and Gerald felt a mix of emotions as they watched her go. She had succeeded no matter what her grades said. Hey, we're going to the party now. Don't stay up waiting for us, she called back. Gerald said, Hey, I want to meet you and Jenny outside. You two really put me on the spot earlier. Dad, you've never done that to us before, and you're not starting now, she replied with a laugh. Also, if you were to try your luck with Jenny, Mom might get a little worried. Just go home and keep it simple. I worry about that, both Gwen and Gerald said together. All right, old man, take me home. There are only 2 things we can do at home, and one of them is sleep. Which one do you want to choose? What do you think? I think we both want the same thing. Let's go. They made their way to the door. As they walked, Gerald asked, By the way, when are you going to start your book? What book? The one that everyone who loves to read plans to write someday. Gwen smiled and said, Gerald Murphy, I can't keep anything hidden from you. But just so you know, I think I'll start when we are settled again. I'll hold you to that. All I really want is for you to be close to me, that's all. That's going to happen no matter what. They walked out of the auditorium into a lovely late spring night, hand in hand, feeling closer to their future. For the rest of the week, Gerald woke up early. He was busy with many tasks. He usually came home before the others arrived. He didn't enjoy some of the things he had to do, but he knew he needed to. Around 8 o'clock, he and Gwen would get in his truck and drive into town for breakfast and to run some errands. They would usually be home by 2 o'clock. One day, Gwen took the truck to visit her parents. She left them an envelope with an address and phone number for emergencies. But if anyone asked, they wouldn't say for sure where she was. She was on a trip, and if anyone wanted to leave a phone number, they could have her call when she called in. After the graduation party, they said goodbye to Sherilyn. She and her friend Jenny were going to drive together to Seattle and promised to call each night on the way. Finally, they started to pack up the last of their things. Gerald checked every little space in the house, the barn, and even Gwen's house. They were completely empty now. On the morning of the 31st, they had breakfast and made a few stops to say goodbyes before heading to the house one last time. 2 hours later, they climbed into the truck, drove through the gate, and left it open. The helpers followed them until they were 50 miles away from town. Then they turned back, and Gwen and Gerald were off to the next part of their life together. They finally stopped at 10 o'clock that night. They had traveled almost 500 miles toward their new home. The motel was small and inexpensive, but they didn't mind. It had a bed and a shower, and that was all they needed. At 11 o'clock, Gerald told Gwen he was going for a walk. He was gone for just 15 minutes. As soon as he left, he took a cell phone from his pocket and looked at it for a moment. Then he opened the phone and typed in a number. He didn't know what things would turn out like, but he felt he had done all he could. He walked to the cafe dumpster next door and tossed the phone inside. Then he went back to their room. Gwen was waiting for him as he changed and got into bed. Their time together that night was warm and comforting. They woke up early and packed their things into the truck. Then they had a quick breakfast at the diner and were on the road before 7 o'clock. They didn't talk about the past, only about where they were heading. At the hotel in town, the boss woke his wife. Time to get up so you can see your new farm. Are you serious? It's only 8 o'clock in the morning. Can't this wait until later? No, you wanted this. I got it for you. We go now or not at all. She got out of bed and put on her clothes. Then she woke her daughter and told her to get dressed. The little girl moved slowly as she got up and put on her clothes. There were a few noticeable marks on her neck and one on her chest. On their way to the limo, they each grabbed a cup of coffee. The two guards sat in the front seat. The boss asked, "Did everything go smoothly?" "Yes, they left around 3 o'clock. We followed them until they got on the highway and we lost them in the busy traffic. We stopped on the way back to keep an eye on things, but they didn't come back, at least not down this road. We passed by the place again just before dark, and nothing had changed. I think they just packed up and left." "Good. Let's go see what we can find." As they drove past Gwen's old house, all they saw was a pile of smoldering ashes. As they entered through the gate to Gerald's house, they noticed that all the trees and bushes along the driveway had been cut down. When they looked towards the house, they were shocked to see a pile of charred remains. The house was no longer there, the barn was gone, and everything was in a state of destruction. All the trees in the orchard had been chopped down, and the garden looked like it was struggling. They parked the car and stepped outside. "This is what you brought me to, you fool," his wife said, expressing her frustration. He took out his phone and called 911. "I need the sheriff here right away. I'm not sure of the address, just take the back road to the lake." He walked towards the barn, but all he saw was a mess of old things. "Boss, you need to come over here." He turned and headed to the front of the house. There, next to what used to be the brick oven, was an envelope with his name on it. He opened it and read the handwritten note. "You took away my life once. I admit that was my fault. You tried to take it again. Now that is on you." "Forget you," he retorted, feeling a surge of frustration as he crumpled the note, realizing there was no need to sign it. Suddenly a voice called out, "Mom, come here right now!" His wife approached their daughter slowly. "Mom, you told us Dad was dead. Look, here are 2 boxes, one for me and one for Rick. They contain letters he wrote us every week since the divorce. Some were sent back to him, too. The last one was written just yesterday, and it says, 'I wish things had turned out differently. Have a good life.' How could you lie to your own kids? I'm going home, and I don't care if I ever see you again. If he ever tries to hurt me again, I swear I will ensure he faces consequences." She picked up the 2 boxes and hurried to the limo. The wife turned back to her boss and confronted him directly. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice steady yet filled with intensity. "What do you mean?" he replied, taken aback. "How long have you been aware this was Gerald's place?" Her tone betrayed her anger. I... That's what I thought. You found out when you saw that interview on TV. You are the worst person I've ever known. I'm going home to try to mend things with my daughter. Then I'm going to pursue a divorce and claim everything I can from you. Please drive us back to the hotel to retrieve our belongings." The helper glanced at the boss, who nodded. He quickly jumped into the car and sped back down the driveway, narrowly avoiding the sheriff's vehicle that had just arrived. Jim got out and surveyed the situation with surprise. Upon receiving the call, he had feared something had happened to Gerald. Instead, he saw a stranger standing there, wearing a solemn expression. "So what's the problem?" Jim inquired. "Look around," the stranger replied. "This place is a total mess." "So what is the problem?" "The state purchased the land just after midnight last night. It seems someone found a way to save the state money on demolition. I want that person arrested." "On what basis? And by the way, who are you?" "The state owns this land now." "I bought it from the state this morning." "Good luck with that. The land was transferred to the state according to the agreement. What you arranged with them is your concern. I suggest you address it with them. For now, you should calm down. The previous owner has moved, and from what I can see, he hasn't done anything wrong. In fact, I informed him he could proceed as long as it was before midnight. Judging by what appears to have happened, the incident likely occurred around 10 or 11 last night. He didn't break any laws. But he destroyed it all. Listen, I've known Gerald for almost 10 years. If anyone had a reason to act, it was him. He built almost everything here by himself. I watched him do it. If I were you, I would focus on how to resolve this and try to forget about him. I'm heading back to town now. I'll call the fire department to put out the remaining fire, and I'll send a cab to pick you up since your ride is gone. Also, since you own this place now, don't forget to register to vote. I'm running for Congress in this area, and I would really appreciate your vote. Forget you. Have a nice day." Jim got back into his car and couldn't stop laughing all the way to town. He had quite the story to share with Gerald in his next email. The boss called out to his worker, "Call for that ride to come back and pick us up after he drops that person off at the hotel. I need to make some important calls." He walked towards the barn and dialed a number. "Yes, it went through, but that situation has caused quite a mess." The sheriff stated he was the one who gave permission for this. "No way, that's not going to work. There's nothing you can do right now. Call the bank or someone who can help and see if they can reverse the payment. I don't care what you need to do. I'm in trouble, and I want him in trouble too. Just make it happen." He ended the call and made another. "I need your best investigator, and I need him today. I need to find a man quickly. I don't have the details with me. Tell him to meet me at the hotel here, and I will give him what he needs." Then he made a third call. It was brief, but both knew what they wanted. How much for one? 20 for a straightforward job, 25 for one that might require extra work. "I want the extra one. I'll call when I know where he is." "Got it." The call ended. 15 minutes later, the limo returned and they got inside. "What did you do with the woman and her child?" "I left them at the hotel until you called. They called a taxi and left just 10 minutes after I dropped them off. Take me back to the hotel and then find me a bottle of scotch. We have work to do." They drove back to the hotel, and he asked his helpers to write down everything they remembered about Gerald's truck, where they ventured, and what they did. The list was short. They noted the make and model of the truck and its license plate number. The places they visited were few and mostly local spots for only a short time. Nothing could be tracked back to them. In short, the only way to find them was through Gerald's truck. Once Jim stopped laughing, he thought it was wise to inform people that some visitors might be looking for Gerald or Gwen. The word was that they planned to travel for a year or two and then look for a place to settle down. He believed that the small town would look after its own. The investigator arrived at 4 o'clock and left with very little information, just a truck and a license plate number. The man had paid a lot of money and wanted answers. He was very good at his job because he could think like someone on the run and had many people he could ask for help. That night he sat down with a map. He saw they had 3 choices: west, north, or east. He decided not to choose east, even though it would be easy to hide in the bustle of busy towns. He also ruled out Southern California for similar reasons. This still left a lot of the country to explore. He made some calls and enlisted a few people to keep watch. His first clue came the next morning when one of his contacts called to say the truck had been sold to a dealer in Santa Fe. Having not acquired another car, he took a taxi to a hotel. This made him realize they were headed west, but he wasn't sure how they would continue their journey. The train did not go through Santa Fe, which left the bus or a plane as options. He thought a plane might be the quickest choice. They had some money, and flying would get them to their destination faster than other means. He called a friend at a travel agency and shared the details about the 2 people. The friend called him back and said that 3 couples matched the description and had booked flights from Santa Fe. One couple appeared too old and was headed to Las Vegas. Another couple was going to Denver, and the last couple was off to Lincoln, Nebraska. He crossed out the Las Vegas and Nebraska couples and focused on the Denver flight. Again, he had to decide between the bus or another flight. A call to another travel agent revealed over 100 couples that matched their description leaving for Denver. There was a large religious meeting in town, attracting many couples. Denver did not seem to be a viable option for him, so he returned to Santa Fe and started fresh. This time, he considered where he might want to end up. He marked Idaho, western Montana, and part of Wyoming. He also marked northern California, along with coastal Oregon and Washington. Finally, he marked Colorado and northern New Mexico. He thought the man he was looking for had spent a lot of time gardening, which made him less interested in Colorado and New Mexico. He also didn't favor Idaho and Montana because of their cold winters, believing that people from the south would prefer warmer climates. He crossed out Northern California due to the high cost of living. So he decided to concentrate on coastal Oregon and Washington, just south of Seattle. He liked this choice because he and others had flown to Seattle a few times recently. They would probably stay outside the big cities, favoring areas more suited for gardening. He also realized that in the areas they were interested in, a vehicle would soon be necessary. He used a search tool designed for insurance companies to look through all new vehicle registrations in a specific region. He set the search to find only pickup trucks, as these individuals didn't seem inclined towards cars. Knowing this search could take a week or more, he decided to look for clues in the local area. He searched their names on social media and news websites. His search found very little information. There were official notices about their divorces. His divorce was over 10 years ago and hers was 5 years ago. There was a small article about their wedding and reception. He thought it was strange because the article mentioned something about renewing their vows. On a sudden idea, he checked public records for Washington and Oregon. He quickly found that they had obtained their marriage license in Seattle, and it had also been recorded there. When he saw a notice that her daughter had received a scholarship to Seattle University, he felt confident they were living in the Seattle area. They had to be somewhere close, probably within 100 miles. He drew a smaller circle on his map and noticed that it included different types of land, mountains, and islands. He summed up what he had discovered and felt like everything pointed in that direction. Now, the hard part would be confirming their location. His first hope was to look at vehicle registrations, and then he needed to figure out how to track financial activities. People needed money to live. When money was spent or moved, it created records. The tricky part was that accessing those records was very difficult without inside help. He decided to visit the boss again to ask about the situation. He called and was told to come the next day after 2 o'clock. They said he should have some solid news about Gerald's finances. The next day, the boss had lunch sent up because one of his lawyers from a well-known law firm was coming with details about Gerald's money. The lawyer arrived on time, looking serious. "Come in and sit down. I hope you have good news," the boss said. "Actually, I have bad news and worse news." The boss frowned, hearing this. "Just tell me," he said, taking a bite of his sandwich. "The money transfer went smoothly. The funds entered his account at midnight and your transaction occurred 30 minutes later. I checked with his bank yesterday and found a surprise. About a month ago, he went to the bank with the last of his paperwork and secured a loan for $250,000. He signed the documents, and when the money was sent over the other night, it went straight to pay off that loan. The bank looked into it, and their lawyers confirmed everything was solid. Murphy moved $150,000 into his investment account. He also took $100,000 in cash. Nobody carries around $100,000 in cash casually. I know, but the bank provided him with documentation stating that the money came from selling land, and it was verified by both the bank and the local federal office. No one will question him if he deposits that money anywhere. I attempted to halt the transfer, but the state informed me that unless I had proof something was wrong, they wouldn't investigate. So he's had the funds for over a month now. What about his investment account? Can we track anything from that? We could if we could gain access to it. It's in their private banking section, you know, the big money accounts. Yes, I know, I have one myself. So you know that no one can see the details of the account. My contact can find some information on the money that moves locally from the past. Here's the surprising part. For the last 10 years, money has been going into his account, but he has never taken any out. He has never had a loan or a credit card or anything. Money just goes into his account. Nothing comes out. The account got so substantial 5 years ago that they moved it into the private banking group. It looks like he has lived on cash for the past 10 years. He earns cash and spends it but doesn't touch his savings. Honestly, he leaves no paper trail at all. His wife has been a school teacher and her accounts mainly receive her paycheck and cover bills. 4 years ago, she started saving money in a regular savings account. The only time she took money out was around Christmas. "These people are so hard to notice," he said. "That's tough. Let's forget about that and focus on preparing for the divorce or whatever my wife is planning." "That's really unfortunate. I can't help it. Your wife has hired my firm for her divorce. She is working with the top lawyer. He said we can assist with business matters, but nothing personal until the divorce is finalized." "How did she end up with him?" "I heard they have been together for almost a year. Now that she is getting a divorce, he wants to marry her and move to Las Vegas." The boss chuckled. "That sounds about right. While this is happening, maybe you can talk to her too." "I already did about a year ago. I was the one who introduced her to him." "No way. Don't call me, I'll call you. The lawyer left feeling a bit better. He hoped he wouldn't hear from that man again. There were rumors that the divorce would get complicated fast, and being on the man's side would be challenging. 20 minutes later, the investigator showed up and sat down with his client. He quickly shared what he found about the truck sale in Santa Fe and discussed his searches. He explained why he believed they would end up near Seattle. The man seemed distracted, but nodded at what he said. Then the investigator mentioned that there wasn't much paperwork to track the money. Gerald was traveling around with a significant amount of cash, and it was unclear where it would be spent. This information meant something to the investigator. People who display large amounts of cash tend to stand out in most places. This could assist him in his search. In the end, the client asked him to head to the Seattle area to find Gerald and requested a report in 2 months. The client gave him a bundle of cash along with a phone number and an address to reach him. The investigator set out to plan his trip to Seattle while his boss headed home to think about how to manage the aftermath of the divorce. 2 months later, in late July, as the investigator wrote his final report, he noticed that the individuals he was monitoring were either very clever or fortunate. He had not found any signs of them at all. They had not purchased any vehicles in their names. There were no large sums of cash left behind anywhere. He had followed the daughter and her roommate, observing that they attended class daily and enjoyed socializing with friends on weekends. They hadn't interacted with anyone suspicious or made any trips outside the area. In his report, he concluded that he still believed the two were nearby but might have gone to Canada or one of the islands, blending in and keeping a low profile. He didn't want to write that report, but the man insisted he needed it in 2 months, so he completed it. What he didn't realize was that the client was too preoccupied with his divorce to actually read the report. By the end of July, news reports were continuously circulating across newspapers and TV. A grand jury began investigating his dealings in politics. His wealthy supporters withdrew their support, and he was on the verge of losing everything just to pay his lawyers, who were not skilled at keeping matters private. 2 years later, he was sentenced to federal prison for multiple charges including corruption, influencing others, and misappropriating government funds. He spent 10 years confined, largely without thought of Gerald or what had led to his downfall. Instead, he directed his frustration towards his ex-wife, who had married an older man and was enjoying the lavish social lifestyle she had always desired in Las Vegas. The individuals at the center of this situation were neither particularly clever nor especially fortunate. They were simply adhering to their plan and living their lives as usual. They traveled to Santa Fe to sell his truck. The truck was 5 years old, and they would not need it for a while. They chose Santa Fe for 2 reasons. First, the dealer was Gwen's cousin. After discussing the truck honestly, they agreed on a price and a schedule for pickup. Afterwards, they took a taxi to collect a sturdy truck that the village had acquired from a military surplus company. This truck would be useful during the cold winters and for transporting heavy items in the summer. They picked up the truck without any issues and drove it from New Mexico to the village boat dock. On their journey, they prepared their own meals using a small camp stove. They had also brought along a small CD player and radio to enjoy music while traveling. During their last trip to the area, they met a couple who planned to retire soon. The couple wanted to sell their 20-acre property. Half of the land was filled with apple trees, while the other half was open for growing vegetables. The house was older but sturdy, featuring 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen and pantry. Gerald and Gwen both loved it right away, so they sat down with the owner to discuss their plans. They talked about their plans and reached an agreement. Gerald would pay the man $10,000 up front to store some of his belongings in the barn. The following year, he would make a $50,000 down payment on the house, with the remainder due when they finalized the purchase 2 years later. The man and his wife were very pleased, and so were Gwen and Gerald. They stayed in town for a few days and met again with the old man and his lawyer. Gerald handed them $50,000 in cash, along with a letter from the bank. They agreed that the final arrangement for the property would take place in the summer 2 years later, when Gerald would pay $200,000 for the property. The old man expressed his gratitude and provided Gerald with a key to the gate and barn for any future needs when they were away. Gerald and Gwen thanked him and took a boat to the village the next day, while their truck would travel on the next barge the following week. Arriving 6 weeks early, they were warmly welcomed and put to work, even though their 2-year position as permanent staff wouldn't officially start until September. Their skills and extra assistance were invaluable since the summer was very busy with visitors. One day, while at the lake, they called Sherilyn and asked her not to visit until August due to limited space. The girls agreed and mentioned they were adjusting well to college life and enjoyed making new friends. In August, they drove both Jeeps over the mountain and parked Sherilyn's Jeep in a secure long-term lot near the boat dock. Gwen and Gerald welcomed them warmly, and they engaged in many enjoyable activities during their 2-week stay. When it was time to leave, Sherilyn gave Gerald the keys to her Jeep and explained where it was parked. Parking at school was challenging, so they decided to take the bus. The area around the aunt's house was also crowded. Therefore, they arranged to leave one Jeep for Gerald and Gwen to use during their visits to the lake on weekends. The couple appreciated their thoughtfulness and enjoyed a boat ride with the girls as they departed. The Jeep allowed them to check on their belongings in storage. While on the boat, Sherilyn finally opened up to them. She shared that the week before graduation, she and Jenny drove to the prison to visit her father one last time. At first, he didn't want to see her, but she insisted on speaking with him. Eventually, he agreed, though their time together was brief. He expressed his regrets about his past mistakes and advised her to move on from him. Sherilyn replied that she couldn't forget him because he was her dad. She shared her plans to continue her life in Seattle even without him. They then exchanged their final goodbyes. Gwen felt concerned about her daughter, while Gerald reassured her, saying, "Sherry, you did what you needed to do. Do you regret any of it?" Sherilyn answered, "No, I was ready for this, but I needed to try." "I have the best parents in the world, and I feel so lucky," she said, holding back her tears. She was grateful that they were all together again. The aftermath, Gerald and Gwen had decided to stay on the staff for 2 years. Gerald would be in charge of maintenance and buildings, while Gwen would lead guest activities and events. They arrived early so they could work with the outgoing staff for 2 months before taking over. By late August, the previous staff had left, and Gwen and Gerald moved into a chalet, which was one of the permanent houses for staff on the property. This gave them a chance to bring some of their small appliances from storage. During the school year, the girls didn't visit often because traveling back and forth took too long for just a weekend. However, they came for the winter break and stayed in the house with Gerald and Gwen. Meanwhile, Jim and Pam were in Washington, D.C. for the winter due to some important new laws being discussed. The girls made a plan to come back next summer in August to help out. Gwen visited a few times during the winter and spring, but Gerald only went once. They worked hard to improve the utilities in 2 dorms. That summer, Jenny chose to stay in Seattle because she got an important internship at a law firm. So in late July, Sherilyn came for her volunteer program, bringing a young man with her. They quickly made plans for him to take Jenny's place. Sherilyn stayed with Gwen and Gerald. As they got to know Robert Gerard, Gwen noticed how much he was like Gerald. Both of them were quiet and hard-working. It was clear to Gwen that Robert really liked Sherilyn, and she liked him too. Robert grew up in a small town nearby and had heard of the village but had never visited. He had spent his childhood working in his family's orchard and knew the area well. He worked with Sherilyn on activities during the day, but if Gerald needed help, he was always happy to pitch in. After they went back to school, both Gwen and Gerald admitted that they really liked Robert and hoped to see him again. They met Robert again during the Christmas break. The two had spent several days with his parents before traveling to the village to spend the rest of the holiday with Gwen and Gerald. It was clear that Robert and Sherilyn were close, and Gwen and Gerald treated them as a couple. Robert was 2 years ahead of Sherilyn in school and was set to graduate with a degree in economics this spring. After that, he planned to go to the University of Washington in Seattle for a doctoral program. Sherilyn had found her passion in economics too and decided to change her major to that. The holiday season was short but enjoyable for everyone. The couple came back during spring break. Gerald asked for Sherilyn's hand in marriage, and she said yes. Gwen felt emotional when Gerald placed a small diamond ring on Sherilyn's finger. They decided to wait for the wedding until after Sherilyn graduated in 2 years. In the meantime, they planned to live together in his apartment in the city. Both Gwen and Gerald were happy with their plans. As their 2-year adventure was ending, Gwen and Gerald started thinking about life after the village. They kept in touch with an elderly man and his wife, who said they would move out of their house in July. They agreed to finalize the sale on August 1st. In April, Gwen went to Seattle and took a test to earn her teaching certificate for Washington. She got her certificate in June and was offered a job for the fall semester in a town by a lake. In August, they went into town almost every weekend to move their things into the house. Sherilyn and Robert came to the house to help unpack boxes. Robert also spent time in the orchard preparing for the fall harvest. During their last week in the village, they said goodbye to friends and taught their replacements what to do. After that, they took the long boat trip back to the city. Gerald's new truck was waiting for them at the dock. He had ordered it, and Robert had picked it up. As they drove home together, Gwen held Gerald's hand. She thanked him for a wonderful 3 years of marriage, their adventures, and their new life together. Gerald smiled and expressed his appreciation for her. He admired her even more now and looked forward to their future together. When they arrived at their house, they were greeted by Sherilyn, Robert, and Robert's parents. They had a big dinner ready, and the large kitchen buzzed with people, laughter, and friendship. 2 weeks after they moved to town for good, they went to the local farmer's market for the first time. Gerald brought 20 loaves of bread and some oddly shaped rolls, while Gwen brought 50 sweet pecan treats. Gerald sold all his loaves and most of the rolls. Gwen sold 35 of her treats, but soon after, all of them were gone as the locals found a new favorite. Robert's parents lived just 20 miles away, and they often visited the market and their home afterward. The future in-laws became good friends right away, with Robert's father teaching Gerald how to care for an apple orchard. In September, Gwen began teaching again and quickly became a respected member of the school staff. Gerald began working on his garden for the upcoming year, but he also took the time to build a deck for his grill and a brick oven for baking bread. As September turned into October, one day in the middle of the month, Gerald came home to find Gwen busy in the kitchen. He could tell from the way she was moving that she wanted to discuss something important. He poured 2 glasses of juice and led her to the couch. A warm fire was already crackling in the fireplace. Once they settled in, he asked, "Okay, Gwen, what's on your mind?" She looked at him with a friendly smile. "Gerald, on the first day of school, I noticed a quiet little girl named Jillian. She has always been a good student, but she hardly speaks. Last month, I found out that she was having a tough time at home. This week, we learned that family services had taken her away because of some trouble there. I was wondering, who do we talk to about this, Gwen?" he asked. "Her name is Miss Trimble. She was coming over tonight." "I should go take a shower and get ready," Gerald said. "Gwen, we don't have to do this," he added. "Gwen, I see that look on your face. This is something we need to do. If we can make it happen, we will." "I care about you, Gerald," she said softly. "I care about you too, Gwen." He stood up and went to take a shower. The woman arrived at 7:30 and they talked for almost 2 hours. The next week, there was a home visit and a checkup on their place. The following week, they went to a class on foster parenting and became certified. 1 week before Thanksgiving, a girl named Jillian Michaels came to live with them. On Thanksgiving Day, Sherilyn met her new foster sister and quickly became friends with the quiet little girl. By mid-January, Gerald and Gwen were named Jillian's permanent guardians. A year and a half later, they officially adopted her, and she took the name Jillian Murphy. On that special day, Jillian looked at Gwen and called her Mom. Then she turned to Gerald and called him Dad. She started to wear a smile that soon became a usual part of her face. Thus, the story of a new family began. Gerald felt safe and proud of his place in their lives. Gwen was excited to be a wife and mother again, and soon became a grandmother for the first time when Sherilyn welcomed a baby a year later. Jillian was glad to have a mother, a father, a sister, and a nephew, a real family she had never had before. From then on, although nothing particularly big happened, they celebrated and enjoyed every little moment together. Hey audience! If you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.